Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. I am joined by the ineffable Britisher this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. This is terrible.
What's terrible?
First, the other chap walks in here saying, howdy. And then you sound as cheerful as something cheerful.
As Ivan Rebrov, the moment that he was given his honorary Russian citizenship.
Along those lines, yes.
Speaking of the other chap, we are also joined by Radical Liberation this evening. Good evening.
Hi, glad I could finally join. Especially honored because I'm a colonial and because this show is called Fake Accents Unite and I don't even have an accent. So,
I'm sorry, are you trying to claim that you don't have an accent at all? Very strong. Your Canadian does need some work, though.
Canadian.
That's before we start on your howdy.
Before we start on howdy.
Be honest, I'll be very honest, Britisher. Both howdy, my use of howdy and y'all are a bit of an affectation. My family's from the South, but I am not. I grew up in the middle of the country, so that would be less common lingo. I just like the two terms, and I just personally choose to use them.
You claim it's the middle of the country, but is this the same middle that your family would refer to as the North?
No. It was brother versus brother during the war between the states where I live here. It is truly the middle.
That's very sad to hear, really.
Oh, it was horrible. St. Louis had a very rough time. Missouri, all of Missouri did at that time.
Well, just as long as we know that, if you put a feather in your cap, you'll call it macaroni.
Now, all right, sure. I think that's gone straight over my head, but
it's an old Yankee reference.
Fair play.
If you're familiar with the song Yankee Doodle Dandy, you may know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Oh, I wish I could say I did. The obviously tonight is a bit of a special night for Britain. Are you familiar with what night it is, Radley?
Guy Fawkes Day.
It is bonfire night, and as I did promise the stream before we came live, I do have to say the obligatory rhyme. Do you know? Will you sing it? Say it along with me, Britisher. Do you know the rhyme by heart?
Go ahead.
Remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder treason and plot. We see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Guy Fawkes, 'twas his intent to blow up King and Parliament. 70 barrels were laid below to prove old England's overthrow. Now, can I remember the third verse? That is the question. I know there's the third one, but it ends with, and what shall we do with him? And Britisher responds... Burn him, Britisher. That is the traditional response.
You see, I would just like to explain to the colonials that the reason we do it on the 5th of November because that was when the magazine Guido Fawkes was founded. And it is in celebration of that foundation that we have a bonfire made up of Guido Fawkes magazines once a year.
Oh, obviously. We used to wheel down the stack of Guido Fawkes magazines, usually in a wheelchair, and people would toss a halfpenny or a shilling in to contribute to the festivities. No.
Usually it depends on the local tradition of each area, but usually it's a copy of the magazine Private Eye that is used to light said magazine bonfire.
Now, what I want to know is going back to the older Guy Fawkes. Is it Guy or Guy?
I've always said Guy. I don't know about you.
Guy. Okay.
Guy would be the continental. That'd be too German for us.
Yeah, I have a friend with the same spelling, but it's pronounced Guy. Anyway, Guy Fawkes. I don't know if anyone's been measuring this, but I'm assuming that his popularity has been gently trending up for the last several years. Am I right about that?
If Binary Surfer is to be believed, he has a shrine to him in his home and is rapidly collecting. Obviously piles of fertilizer to fill his barrels with,
I mean, I suspect that the frustration with Parliament must be very high across the board, even maybe separate from Leave versus Remain and stuff like that. Isn't that the case? There's just general discontent with how Parliament is functioning.
I mean, Britain is always a hotbed of discontent, as you might call it. Discontent is kind of how we're born, but whether or not that motivates us to action is
sure. But I mean, British, don't you think there's general discontent, maybe higher than
there is most certainly greater discontent than is usually the case with Parliament, particularly because now it is so crystallized on one particular decision where we have it in black and white that they are going against the popular will.
Right.
Although, it must be pointed out that although some sympathies with the intended action of, Guy Fawkes, no doubt will have risen, the fact that he was effectively part of a Catholic plot trying to overthrow sort of the hegemony of the Protestants,
the Church of England in particular,
might not necessarily have been, quite as popular a thing, because it would have meant that, those dreadful Catholic people, who go to mass on Sunday. I mean, not that I mean anybody in particular, but those horrible people would have been allowed to take over the country.
Surely they must seem like a Catholic takeover must seem less threatening relative to what you're dealing with right now.
I'm not sure. Once the papists take over and start lecturing us all with Aquinas and other foreign writings, who knows where it might lead.
It also depends which particular arm of the Catholic Church ascends in this country. Given that shall we say the Poles might have something to say about the current head of what we consider the papacy and all sorts.
If a certain wing were to take over, then I'm sure the days of Torquemada would be returning, except this time around just in Britain. And for some reason, there would be a lot of helicopters flying to and fro with a papal symbol emblazoned on them.
Just to go. It's like in 10 years' time, there's just going to be blimps with like the holy cross of the just flying across London with massive sort of loudspeakers. Believe, plebeians of Britain, believe, and people will be in the streets lamenting that that when the Islamists were here, all they had to do was listen for the tower to call out once or twice a day.
And Tony Blair will be sort of carried in procession on a litter through the city centre of London,
Well, of course,
pennies to the crowd.
Well, of course, we'll all be required to have an oil portrait of his face in every room of our homes,
Yes. That being an oiled portrait of his after his having resigned from, no longer being prime minister and having become Catholic. That would be the moment of his spiritual ascension.
I just like to note that I'm feeling much more comfortable joining the show since Dragonlord says Radlib's accent is obviously fake. So I must be in the right place.
It's nice to see that Dragonlord is in the chat. Do you know who Dragonlord is?
No, I don't.
It's an allusion to another channel. I suspect it is not the actual Drakenlord, but don't worry about it. Just if you fancy it, Count Dankula has a video or 3. But some super chats have come in. I don't want to get too far behind on them, so we'll start with those. Irate Pirate says, "Ahoy there! Tell me, why is Parliament not in session on this, the most relevant of Guy Fawkes nights?"
Is that true? They're not in session today?
They are not in session this evening.
Well, they're not completely dummies, are they?
No. Well, also, I think that anyone who chose to attack on a symbolic night like tonight is also a bit thick. If they were sitting, given that the police would likely be on a high alert. But what can you do?
That's true.
The only thing to really come out of Parliament that I've seen the last couple of days has to be the new speaker. The new speaker was signed. What was it?
Was chosen?
Yes.
Yes, he was chosen.
It's basically the
Berkow-
old deputy speaker who's
Is
just basically
Berkow
down.
done? Is Berkow officially done yet?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Lindsay Hoyle is now the speaker.
Any hope that it'll be any more even-handed? Or actually, I'm not sure I've heard the Britisher comment on this. Do you perceive Berkow as having been not doing his job quite right, sir?
Yes, I think it's quite hard not to think, not to see what he was doing as bias.
Okay, I mean that was my impression, but it's that
beautiful thing, that loyally thing, whereby you can actually be biased, but you can, how should we say, you can disappear behind a wall of jargon, regulation, and paragraphs, and appear to just be doing what's reasonable. And that was his art, if you know what I mean.
The difficulty with Berkow is, whilst in the chair, he was in the majority. I would say he was professional. He maintained his duties well, but he did have a habit of the things that he would not entertain in the chair as much as the things that he would. The speaker has a lot of power to, move people on, as it were, and so you can artificially shorten the times that certain people get to speak and so on and so forth. But it was a lot of his behaviour off the chair. The speaker is supposed to be a neutral position, after all.
Right.
Which is one of the interesting things. So when Lindsay Hoyle came into the chair, he's interesting as being one of the MPs who's not declared, for instance, which way he voted in the Brexit referendum.
Oh, so even in his private communicate, outside of Parliament, he is talking to the press, he hasn't made his flown his colours.
He's not virtue signalled it. No, he's just chosen to keep his private ballot private, as it were. So it's one of those things where, in a way, although I suspect he voted Remain, in a way it doesn't matter because he should be judged on his actions in the chair, as it were. And also his conduct beyond, but it shouldn't really matter which way he voted. In this way, it gives him he's a bit of an island now, because if he shows bias one way or the other, it's going to be immediately obvious and that sort of thing. So
so there is some slim hope that things will be a little bit less frustrating under this speaker.
It is a hope. We're not particularly optimistic, but
I think one question I would like to have answered, which I don't believe anybody will really be able to answer here, but how come we had this now? Why could this not wait until a new parliament? I thought
Berkow had just promised a certain, when a certain thing happened or a certain date or something that he was.
But what that is, given that we have an imminent new parliament, and given that there isn't really anything for parliament to do between now and the election, why did we need this now? Why did this old rotten parliament still need to be the parliament that selected the man who would be in charge of the rules come the new parliament? Why could one not have just left it to the new parliament to decide among its ranks whom they wanted?
So you suspect conniving?
Well, to be honest, I don't know. I think we will first have to see what this chap turns out like. Apparently folks preferred him to be in the chair rather than Berkow, because obviously he was the deputy speaker, so he once in a while was in the chair.
He has got some experience,
and it is believed that he was then fairer than Berkow was in his selection of people. But nonetheless, I just found it a bit strange, as in, this is not strictly necessary now.
To be perfectly honest, this entire parliamentary session has been bizarre, obviously, for obvious reasons. But aside from all the Brexit shenanigans, it's been the longest parliamentary session in the history, isn't it? Of the entirety of the British Parliament.
Wait. So not the longest since 500 years ago, just the longest.
Just the longest.
Wow.
It's been something, I can't remember how many weeks it was.
Wait. What about, what was the guy, Cromwell? What was that? How long was that one that had...
Well, I think that was superseded by this one.
Yeah, there was some news about it. Yeah,
and one thing I must say with this selection, I did enjoy, and that was there was one particular person about whom I had said anyone but her, and I had this fear that history was going to repeat itself again, because I said that about Theresa May, and then they made a prime minister. This time round, I made my thoughts clear: anyone but Harriet Harman.
Yes, we were all scared of Harriet Harman about 3 weeks ago. Yeah,
Harriet Harman polled, I believe, 70 votes in the first round. Now you have to imagine, of course, you've got the first round, and then two people get knocked out. So then those votes of those two people are available, right? So you would assume everybody next time round has more votes, and perhaps just insufficiently so, and therefore they get knocked out, and then it goes on. Harriet Harman, I believe, managed to drop votes. So I think she started at 70, and then at the next one had something like 45 or whatever, and then decided to retire or something like that. So it was another person who was eliminated, but she kind of dropped out. Which was heartening to see. Once that had happened, I didn't really care so much who was going to win anymore,
because the one we definitely didn't want to win was at least out.
Yeah, because Harriet Harman, that would have just been, it just would have been horrible.
You'd have heard the hatchet coming from miles away as
yes,
the Britishers swung his way down.
In her speech, the observers, in the media or whatever, seemed to sort of say she was the one who sounded most like the one intending to continue in the fashion of Bercow,
the legacy,
from what she was promising. So that was, that was already negative enough. And then aside from that, she's Harriet Harman.
One of the things that I think it's going to be interesting to see is the amount that he actually says, because as we Bercow became effectively a household name. He was one of the mainstays that, obviously we've had 3 sets of cabinets since the May era started, right? And he's just always been there. But his speaking record, compared, I think AA put up a tweet with the number of words spoken by every single Speaker of the House over time, and he has something massive. Obviously, his predecessor spoke a lot as well, but his graph dwarfs his predecessor.
Yeah, I was going to say the fact that Bercow got so much attention. I mean, I don't fully understand how Parliament works, obviously, but I kind of had the sense, isn't he somebody who, if he's doing his job right, he sort of disappears? Like a good butler. You know what I mean?
His job is to hold the House to account effectively and keep the agenda on track. It's his job to keep pushing things along, and also to shut down rowdy behaviour, which is commonplace in the House. Too much jeering or cheering or whatever, and to ensure that statements are heard. Bercow became popular, as it were, because he's in the chair. He's quite charismatic, and he has a good order. And in the way that the Commons is entertainment as much as it is politics, he basically had enough rebuttals and comebacks and so on and so forth that people found him entertaining. Historically, it's not necessary for the job, but I'm sure it pushed the ratings.
Well, I would put it like this: every speaker becomes a household name, just simply because every speaker is the one who is at Prime Minister's question time shouting them all down and telling them how to behave. So if you are the one who is in charge of the kindergarten, invariably you are going to become known. There's no doubt about that.
Not to mention he's supposed to be non-partisan, so at some point he'll be shouting at someone you don't like very much.
Yes. So that's definitely the case. Now, in Bercow's defence, do we really think any speaker of whatever ilk would not have been having to say a great deal and do a great deal of explaining during the whole Brexit saga. So in that regard, he had a unique challenge that lasted 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So in that field, one perhaps has to kind of, give him some leeway. Also, of course, you have to consider that it's the last 10 years in which he was Speaker.
Yeah.
So it was the entire social media revolution, which has happened during his time, really.
Yeah.
If we're fair,
there are compilations.
Yes. So it's not as if there are too many compilations of Betty Boothroyd as Speaker. So in that regard, I think no doubt the next Speaker is also going to be considerably more prominent, just due to the way the world is these days.
I see.
I'm not sure whether he will be quite that prominent, because he doesn't strike me as the person who will quite milk it as much as Bercow did.
Well, we're still...
Breaking news. Bercow is chosen as the effigy for Bonfire Night.
He's an effigy, is he?
This is Rory Herbert in the chat shared this, and I found the story on the Evening Express.
Is this one of the big bonfire nights where they do massive...
Edenbridge Bonfire Society in Kent has this year chosen the Buckingham MP due to his, quote, controversial behavior over the past 12 months.
Yeah, I could imagine. I know there is one particular place, this might be it, where they do a very big bonfire thing, and they always have rather elaborate effigies. So they have burnt Osama bin Laden and whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it may well be that this year's villain, if you know what I mean, if you're a guy who has to basically think up some papier-mâché, a giant effigy to burn, Bercow might be a fun one to do, if you know what I mean.
Okay, one more comment from this. Bonfire Society Chairman Bill Cummings said, this year we have chosen the infuriating Commons Speaker, John Bercow, as our celebrity guy. And our message to Mr. Bercow is that you cannot keep disrupting Parliament, and this is one situation you cannot argue yourself out of.
Well, I would say there was one very irritating thing I found about Bercow, and that was sometimes he kind of got into a bit of ding-dong with the other, with some MP or whatever. And how should we say, he had that manner of the annoying radio talk show host who has the ability to press the silence button for the other side, and then has all the time in the world to have the last word.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Like having the last word.
Because he is the one in charge of Parliament, he is the one who can afford to do that, and make himself look good. And that's just it. It doesn't really make you look that good.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like an abuse of the position.
It's not
what the position is for. It's not the purpose of the position is not so that the speaker gets to have the last word, right? That's really abusing
one of those
your role.
things that one would need to explain to Mr. Bercow. Perhaps now that he has more time on his hands.
You can get together with Keith fast. I did notice a quick question in the chat. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not sure who said it quite early on in the stream. But they asked why another Labour MP had been selected as the Speaker. The tradition with the Speaker of the House is that it goes back and forth between the opposition, the main opposition, and the current sitting party.
And Bercow was Tory officially.
And Bercow was officially Tory, although everyone recognised him as being sort of Labour light or Tory light.
It might have been possible to put in another Tory, because Bercow was hardly very conservative,
and also because tradition had already been broken with
precisely because the successor of Betty Boothroyd was another Labour person.
Yes. So there's that. Right. The Invidious says, I have reached thrift levels I couldn't imagine. 2 buttered slices of toast, a pot of tea, and a bowl of bran flakes with milk, all for the cost of 26 pence.
We are proud
How
of
do you do that?
I mean, I'm proud of him, but I can't imagine that he's getting anything resembling coloured vegetables in his diet at the moment. He keeps, every week he comes back and he's just like, I've managed to live this week for £4.25. I've managed to live this week for £4.22 by cutting out...
So this time round, it was how many? It was 26 pence, was it?
26 pence for 2 slices of toast.
Pence.
Tea,
so here is our challenge for you. Next time round, have it, but it has to be a similar buffet, but try and get beneath 26 pence.
And you've got to make it more interesting as well next time. You can't just be the same things, but you bought it from Asda instead of Lidl. Come on. Hello, Reasoned Vision in chat. You say notice me. I've noticed you. Since Goen says 326 seconds late. And clearly I don't need to remind you of the treason against the populace. Will Britain burn again? Well, that is the question.
Well, this is the problem with these Vikings. They just basically always assume everything is going to go up in flames the first instant. But I believe this is what one might call Scandinavian projection.
Well, we're more like a slow burn, something like the embers of a fire, perhaps a kind of light napalm. So that's how
we take our time to build up sufficient hate.
A bit like a steam engine, really. So there is that. Mighty Balzac says, oh my goodness, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. He didn't say that, but I'm going to try and say this. Did Diocletian's cabbages ever win a ribbon at the harvest fair?
First off, congratulations. It was Diocletian. Secondly, I had no idea that Diocletian was particularly known for his cabbages.
I've got to look this up now.
Thus, I wouldn't be able to tell you whether he ever won a ribbon at the local fair. But I would suspect, given that Diocletian was, how shall we say, somewhat of an authoritarian, it would have been a brave jury that would not have awarded him the ribbon.
Here we go. So I'm gonna share this on to the chat as well, because they can read alongside. Of cabbages and emperors. After 21 stressful years as Roman emperor, Diocletian retired to the peaceful gardens of his hometown of Split, Croatia, to grow cabbages. It says here, when Stieglitz, a German scholar, wrote these words after his travels in Istria and Dalmatia, 2 provinces of modern-day Croatia, he was probably paraphrasing Eutropius, the Roman scholar who lived there in the second half of the 4th century. Stieglitz and Eutropius romanticized the situation, but their words capture the spirit of Diocletian's love for cabbages. So from the palace walls, Diocletian watched his garden in Salone, where what he cultivated with his own hands gave him more satisfaction than when he ruled his huge empire. When Maximinus, ambassador, begged Diocletian to become emperor for a second time, he answered, "If you could show the cabbage I planted with my own hands to your emperor, he definitely wouldn't dare suggest I replace the peace and happiness of this place with the storms of a never-satisfied greed." And that's Stieglitz.
Just given that you were busy entering stuff, just enter Diocletian's palace. And see what comes up. When you hear that he, retired to humbly grow cabbages, might be a slight understatement.
Yeah.
Once you get to see an image of his what is left today still of his then residence, you very quickly get an idea that. Yes, he retired in sufficient splendor, and what he had done is he had carved up the entire empire to be ruled by various emperors. This is the so-called tetrarchy that he invented. Mm-hmm. So you have 4 emperors who all have a second. So. There was this famous thing. The Caesar obviously is obviously taken from Julius Caesar. The first emperor is usually seen as Augustus, and therefore to be Augustus or to be Caesar kind of meant to be the ruler. Well, in the Tetrarchy you had 4 Augusti, so 4 emperors, and their second would then be the Caesar. So you had 4 Caesars and 4 Augusti. So this is the mess he left behind.
Good grief.
And what eventually happened was that invariably, as was always the case, these various parts of the empire fell out with each other. And in the end, it just came to a showdown between, one in each half. One emperor had knocked the other one out of the game, and therefore there were two left, and they eventually had a big go at each other, which was inevitable. The chap who won it all was some little-known chap called Constantine.
Oh, no, never heard of him.
Became known as Constantine the Great.
Right.
And his part of, his quarter, so to speak, was the westernmost part.
Yeah.
So sort of parts of Gaul and Britain, which is why they have a statue to Constantine outside York Minster these days. It's not an ancient one, but it kind of, it's sort of in honor of the fact that the conquest of the entire empire began here.
Mm.
So basically, he beat everybody else, got in charge of everything, and no kidding, found Jesus.
Yes, yeah. His conversion to Christianity is a questionable one.
Right.
It's unclear whether he himself ever was a Christian. He had himself baptized on his deathbed. So goes the saying.
Yeah, and all he did, I think.
Are you sure they weren't? Sorry, are you sure they weren't just washing the corpse?
Yes, yeah. That's the best joke in that regard was that the greatest honor that the Senate could bestow was to declare a dead emperor divine, and because they didn't have any other honor, they declared him divine. So, if he was the first Christian emperor,
he's competing.
Bestowed upon him was a heresy. Yes,
right.
But yeah, he claims to have seen the symbol of Christ in the sky before his great battle at Rome, and the saying goes that he advised his soldiers to paint the cross of Christ onto their shields.
Right.
And of course, the manner in which he won that battle, namely that the pontoon bridge over which the other side came collapsed, of course, had
divine implications.
Yeah, precisely. It suggested that there was a greater power at work.
So British, I want to jump in because by sheer luck and just constantly talking about stuff having to do with ancient Rome, you've finally hit in an area that I know something about because I taught Eusebius's ecclesiastical history at a class at church.
Prepare to get schooled, Britisher.
So now I'm going to be told in how many points I've been wrong in this.
No. I'm not going to say that. I was just going to say that.
Although, be assured, you were wrong.
The history's actually a quite good history, I think, until you get to I think it's literally the last chapter where it just becomes what's the right word? Panegyric, an ode to Constantine. And how great he is, and how he's the best thing since sliced bread, and everything, and it's just nauseating to read.
You can just tell when the guard with the heavy axe came into the room whilst they were writing it, can't you? Just to make sure it was written correctly.
Basically Eusebius is documenting all these series of persecutions in the first couple hundred years of the church, and he views Constantine as having effectively put an end to that, which isn't fully accurate, but it's roughly right.
He kind of, let's just say he reversed them. I mean,
let's also
that's the way to put it.
Point out that the
basically
communication
he's
not being what it is today.
He's like, you're the protector of the church, and blah blah blah, and all this stuff. And it just, if you've ever seen somebody who's sucking up to power, anyway,
any more than AA sucks up to power.
I think what we're talking about, I think for anybody who needs a lesson in what that might look like, is just try and find a copy somewhere on YouTube of George Galloway holding a speech to Saddam Hussein.
Oh dear!
Oh my!
That is very much, I think, the sphere in which we are in. You are the lion. bestrides the world, like it's that kind of thing.
That kind of thing. Yeah, it's
when
pretty bad.
When it comes to Constantine, he was very much again an emperor, much in the mold of Diocletian. So this is a chap who, well, he wasn't really one to take no for an answer, if you know what I mean. This is power in the mold of absolute power, and therefore it is so interesting, that when Constantine then sort of calls this sort of first gathering of all the patriarchs and bishops and whatever, because the Christian faith is a bit of a mess when it comes to actually, what is this supposed to be about? And you kind of realize that what it kind of means is, here is the most powerful man in the world, the one man who can just basically with one word have you killed. And he calls all these religious people who are doing nothing else but quarreling with each other together, and effectively informs them that this is all going to be worked out before you all leave here. you do get a sort of a sense of just how much pressure must have been on these poor souls.
Yeah.
And so this is how we get the Nicene Creed, which many Christians know. It's also called, and I didn't know this, Britisher, it's also called the Niceno-Constantinopolitan. I'm getting the syllables wrong.
Yeah.
Constantinopolitan.
Constantinopolitan Creed. Thank you.
Yeah, I've heard, because yes, Constantine is usually associated with the Nicene Creed. But right. I've also read somewhere, I mean, please don't ask me where anymore, it's too many years ago, that it might actually have been a later emperor to whom it truly is attributed.
But where did you hear this, Britisher?
You swine. but it definitely...
Give us your sources.
The founding of this basic idea must have been around, if you know what I mean. But yes, you can sort of see that here was a religion that was long persecuted. Much of the writings were written down long after the event anyway. And then, with the persecution, of course, a great deal of scripture would have been lost. So you have various bits and pieces of scripture spread all about the empire, and here is the emperor going, okay, we're turning Christian now. Nobody still really knows why he suddenly decided upon this. And then he said, okay, so now we have to kind of create a proper codex. So everybody is to arrive in Nicaea and we'll work this out. And you just know the inference is or else. It's...
Right. Yeah, it's slightly more complicated than that. I'm looking at...
Yeah, Britisher, you're full of shit. Could you just quiet down in the space of your betters?
It was originally adopted in the city of Nicaea, present-day Turkey, by the First Council of Nicaea in 325. In 381, it was amended at the First Council of Constantinople, and the amended form is referred that way. But 325 was probably under Constantine, right?
I'm hazy on my years of Constantine. When it comes to it, there was that many different councils, because emperor after emperor called councils to work out, work further on the codex, so to speak. But I believe it is believed that one of the earlier ones, but not necessarily the Constantine one, would have been the one in which the Nicene Creed was finally agreed. Whether that is the amendment you mean, I don't know.
No, I'm sorry, I got mixed up. So it says Constantine died in 337, so 325 would have been under him. The original Council of Nicaea was him. Yeah, shotgun Creed time, right?
Yeah, and. To give you an idea, wasn't there a daughter? And I don't think this was, this was nothing to do with a royal household or whatever. But I think there was some sort of, some sort of law he passed or something like that was effectively based on a particular case of the day, whereby if a chaperone allows a daughter to elope, so basically she is part of the plot to allow the daughter to elope with her, beloved, She is to be killed by having molten lead poured down her throat and things like that.
Oh, jeez.
Constantine the Great does not strike you as the most warm-hearted of people. So this is what I mean. This whole conversion to Christianity, in his case, as the person that is Constantine, it's a very strange one. His father, basically he worshipped Sol, so the divine sun,
right?
And that obviously was then passed on to the son. But in those cases, it already seemed that more and more people were effectively dedicating themselves to the worship of one god in the pantheon. So from that point, it might not have been that great a leap from basically only worshipping Sol and no other god, if you know what I mean. Even though you still acknowledge the existence of other gods, but you only worship that one. From that to then jumping to the Christian God and it's the only God and so on, might not necessarily have been that great a leap anymore, but one is still somewhat confused as to, how did this happen, unless one just simply believes entirely in, yes, it was divine revelation and so on.
Well, of course, British.
I have a less divine explanation, but go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say that when the Britisher came down in his great flying machine in ancient times.
When he was 20.
Mm-hmm. A 20-year-old Britisher was declared the one true god of Constantinople. Yes.
I think this is well covered, Britisher, by Rodney Stark in his Rise of Early Christianity. I forget the title of the book. But I think, to me, a non-divine explanation is simply that Christianity grew quite well in the first couple hundred years there.
It was rapid.
By the 300s, it was not an entirely dumb move to keep the Christians on side, shall we say.
Insofar as I'm aware, the pejorative reason for it was that aside from the fact that the Jewish God was considered to be someone you didn't really mess with, it was considered to be one of the stronger gods that was around, and suddenly you have this religion coming around, which is not only telling you that you can effectively get in on the covenant, which previously required you to have been Jewish, but also that basically had very few added connotations to it. You didn't have to sacrifice any relatives or anything like that. It did help,
Here's that book title real quick by Rodney Stark, because the title's long. It tells the story. The Rise of Christianity, How the Obscure Marginal Jesus Movement Became the Dominant Religious Force in the Western World in a Few Centuries. So he ends the story essentially with, the Constantinian era. And his story is, how did it get to that point? What happened in those couple hundred years?
Yeah, I would also point out that it's. I have read. I don't know. People would have got that from. It may well be due to certain indications from certain emperors, but that it may have also been believed at the time that being Christian. I'm not sort of talking of the people who were Christians, but from the pagans looking at Christians, that it was seen as a tax dodge. Because there was a tax on the Jews.
Yeah.
So they effectively saw this as, these are just Jews claiming to be something else in order to get around the tax.
We have to remember that there are several stories in the Bible of, if I take someone like, is it Sapphira, and I can't remember her husband's name, Radlib, where they effectively end up starting a community, and then if you end up holding anything back from the community, God ends up casting divine retribution and killing you off, right? So I don't know whether or not that was enough of an incentive on top of the...
That's not quite the point of the story.
No,
I know. The story is that they said they were going to give such and such, and then they basically lied. And the apostles said, "What, you think you can just lie to us?" And then they just died.
Well, one of my sort of favorite angles when it comes to Christianity and whatever is the Vicar of Dibley.
Yes, I disagree with the creation of that series as well.
It's did I? Yeah, I think I've just mentioned it before, but I don't even know too many more. Basically asks, what was that communist tract you were reading in church today? The vicar goes, I think you'll find it was the Sermon on the Mount.
Right, yeah. That sounds exactly like how AA is responding to church, yes. What is this commie stuff? So shall we move on to another super chat?
I think that's smart. I can see Base Liz saying, it's Ananias and you've got the story very, very wrong. I think the main thing I was trying to point out is that the idea of God striking someone down for any reason was much more common in those days, and you didn't want to mess with them if it could be avoided. And so, there's probably more connotations there than just, this is a bit of a get out of tax-free card, British Knight says, I'm so sick of Christian infighting. Which, given we've just been doing, says, I love British history in all its aspects, but sometimes it is a bit much. Brittonic polytheism, ho. How many versions of the Judeo-Christian God are there that we're all going to worship? One for every denomination, of course. That's clearly the way it was going.
One terrifying thing of sort of late Roman history is the policing of heresies. The sort of hair-splitting heresies that most people, most Christians today would kind of shrug at, as in sort of, yeah, what? Basically had entire communities, destroyed, enslaved, their city razed to the ground and whatever. It was unbelievable how much of it there was. So First, you had the pagan regime, so to speak, show this brutality. But then, once the Christians were in charge, it wasn't long until they effectively started enacting it upon themselves, because this particular community believed in something that was a smidgen different than that particular community, if you know what I mean. And
the Christians were considered to be quite
very substantial differences they were quarrelling about.
The Christians were, which ones are going to eat which part of Jesus, so, it's... You'd be surprised how what is considered to be minor to an outsider is not minor to denominations. Although it's funny, given that something like I think it's the Methodists disagreed with one of the other denominations on a single passage of scripture, something about the divine state of communion, I think it was. Although don't quote me on that, probably wrong. But isn't it funny how a single line can end up shooting people off in different directions? Let me see. Where was I? Mr. Spoon. Oh, going back to politics now. Marvellous. Mr. Spoon says, I worked with Hoyle, that's the new speaker, on a select committee, and I am not an MP. He is an old-fashioned left, but is fair, kind, and of generous spirit. I think he'll do great.
That sounds like could be worse, That doesn't sound... given what the choices usually are these days.
Could be Harriet Harman, yes.
Right. Old-fashioned left, but fair, kind, and generous sounds not too bad, really.
Oh, well, as far as academic agent is concerned, he's more than likely, having heard the sort of chewing the carpet and tearing the wallpaper from the walls. Kind of old-fashioned left.
The idea that the left could be ever fair, kind, or of generous spirit is basically... the deepest.
They have been wrong for the past 400 years.
I think he would go further back than that. He'd probably say something along the lines of Eve in the garden was a communist, and that's why she shared the apple, which should have been sold to Adam, in which case it wouldn't have happened the way it was.
They infringed on God's property rights when they took the apple from the tree.
It's the one set of fences that he set down. Yeah. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, will there be much degeneracy this episode? Sargon is streaming, and I'm trying to decide who to watch.
So what this puts me in mind of, and I don't know if you have any such phenomenon in the UK, but on US television, it used to be that they knew the night that the ratings were going to be collected, the Nielsen ratings or whatever, to see how popular your show was. And this could affect whether your show was canceled, the kind of budget your show had. And so suddenly you're watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, no relation. And suddenly he's walking around doing Q&A with the audience with a woman in a bikini just happens to be next to him for the night, you know? I mean, it was shameless shilling, you know?
And tonight, on tonight's show, we will be doing an in-depth report on the nudist beaches in the south of France, which then, funnily enough, they don't have time for by the end of the show because they've run over, but everybody's still been sitting there waiting for it. Talking to nudist beaches in the south of France, is anybody familiar here with Louis de Funès films?
No, I'm afraid not.
Spell that last name. Louis
F-U-N-E-S. I believe there's an accent aigu over the E at the end. And he made a series of films that was the Policeman of Saint-Tropez. And he is this small, pedantic, annoying little man who is an officer in the police force. And it's very 1960s. So obviously his daughter is a young woman of the 1960s, if you know what I mean. And he basically, will shout at his police officers simply for looking at her as she's walking down the street. But one of the classic moments in that whole thing, Jesus Franco in the chat has just said Fantomas. That was one of his famous roles, where he's the policeman trying to catch Fantomas, which is a sort of a jokey James Bond thing, by the way. But yes, the policeman at Saint-Tropez, there is, I think in the first film, one episode where they have to arrest the nudists on the beach. Something to behold. It is wonderful. Because
please tell me someone at some point says, "Have you got any weapons on your person?"
it's
just this sword, sir.
Where you've got he's got several frogmen who will be attacking from the sea. He's got police officers stationed, to the front, left, and right. But in order to really get a grip of this, what we need to do is we need someone to infiltrate them. So of course there is the policeman he always picks on, if you know what I mean.
He's standing there completely nude apart from a wire.
So he's there walking rather awkwardly onto the beach, if you know what I mean, with a strategically positioned newspaper in his hand, with all the other police officers with binoculars laughing themselves daft. This poor sod has to walk out into the beach. But yes, the rounding up of the nudists is a thing of joy. But just generally, his career as police officer that rises and wanes is something to behold. It sort of on the European continent, the policeman of Saint-Tropez really means something because he represents everything that you despise in a parking attendant who is insistent on giving you a ticket, if you know what I mean.
It sounds to me.
Hey, I noticed. Was this in that same series? I'm not sure, but I noticed that he made the largest grossing film ever made in France, which I am not going to be able to pronounce. Say the name.
I don't know. Le
Grand Vaudreuil.
Oh, that's
the Great Knight. Vaudreuil.
No, it means
it's
the
that's
Great
where
Stroll.
they escape from the Nazis. They escape. It's a Second World War.
The Sound of Music.
Two ordinary Frenchmen helping the crew of a Royal Air Force bomber shot down over Paris make their way through German-occupied France to escape arrest.
Yes,
and it's a comedy. Comedy.
They're beautiful things. I remember one particular visual gag where they are in a lorry, and they're sort of on a mountain route, if you know what I mean. So you've got on one side of the road you've got the cliff upwards. And the other side of the road, you've got the drop downwards, if you know what I mean. And they're sort of going at speed in a lorry along that road, and German motorbike men are after them, if you know what I mean. These German soldiers on motorbikes that we know from Indiana Jones films and whatever.
Right.
And one of them is got rid of because there is literally a machine painting the white line onto the road. And the machine has to swerve out of the way as they are coming at speed around the corner with their lorry, with the white line, of course, heading towards the drop end. And the next thing you just see is the German motorbike man going at speed around these corners, and all you see is the reflection of the white line in his goggles. And the next thing you just see him heading out into space, into the drop, if you know what I mean. It's beautiful. Louis de Funès was a very big star in France. There was one where he played the Michelin guide for restaurants. Any of you familiar with that? You know how a restaurant can be given stars as to its quality?
Definitely, yeah.
And he played, if I'm not mistaken, his name, I think, in the film was Duchemont, Monsieur Duchemont. And he would arrive at these restaurants usually in some form of disguise, because otherwise they all knew who he was, and they would shower him in gifts and expensive wines.
What you're saying is this is Ratatouille before Ratatouille.
Yes, along those lines. And he arrives at these restaurants trying to, sample the food to give a fair judgment as to, whether it's any good or not. But of course, because in France it is pretty much a religion, it's taken deadly seriously. You can imagine that he has therefore got the power to either elevate you or absolutely destroy you, depending on his decision. So yes, it's. In the end, I think, if I remember rightly, he sort of crosses swords with the ultimate French sin, which is the purveyor of fast food.
Oh my!
Who is, basically churning out grilled chickens in his factory and whatever. Which, of course, as far as Monsieur Duchemont is concerned, is yes, the equivalent of heroin.
Yes, the height of bad taste, as it were. Let me see. DRT is king, says Fidel Castro, ex-dictator of Cuba and father of Justin Trudeau's father, died on Augusto Pinochet's birthday. Also, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Well, thank you for that amusing factoid there, DRT. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, fake accent unite socks are great, but where are Britisher leggings? This is something... if you are still around after the stream, in fact, leave a comment if you want us to do a merch design stream where we create said leggings. I think that would be an interesting one, yes. Several people actually have recently bought T-shirts, Baby Grows, socks, and mugs and things with the Fake Accents Unite theme, which is lovely to see. I hope you all enjoy those. Moving on, David Chandler says, R.E. Farage not standing for MP. Oh yes, back to the politics. I believe if elected, he would have to have given up his position as an MEP. Did I not hear this mentioned on the news? Is that correct, Bridger?
Well, I doubt that would really be a great... I don't think that would be a great problem, because how long do we still expect to have MEPs?
Yes, well, there is that.
So this doesn't sound like the reason for the ultimate sacrifice, if you know what I mean. If we're really thinking that the Tories look, pretty much set to win this, and everybody thinks that may well mean that by the end of January we may be out, I don't think Farage is not wanting to stand because he's afraid he otherwise might lose his, 2 months worth of wages from the European Union.
Do you know what I think it is? As I have said consistently for the last year or so, I think that he wants out, as in not just of the European Parliament but of politics in general. And I think he's sick to death of it. He pretty much regards his own party as a protest movement to apply pressure. I don't think he really believes there would be much point to seriously winning any seats, because
once Brexit is done, what do they do in the House of Commons?
It's also you call another general election as soon as you've passed through the No Deal and ensured that negotiations are going to take place. But
so basically, they're MPs until the end of January, and then they just call by-elections for those particular seats.
Basically, the reason it's considered weird in general as well is just because he's considered to be he is the leader of what's considered to be one of the major running parties, as it were. Even if it's an offshoot. So, and they usually run because it's like, if people have faith in the leader, at least they'll be elected MP, where they are. But, no, as I say, I think you're quite correct. I think he sees the Brexit Party first and foremost as a pressure group. Although they have had a bit of a setback themselves in even that aim. Didn't they have 50 potential candidates who they were going to field all resigned on the same day? Something like that. That happened 3 days ago. I think
that could well be. But I really, I see it as basically they are there to apply pressure. They simply just want to continue to apply pressure. To a certain extent, one is wondering whether they're losing. I think. What is the end result you want, given that you know that a 100% what I want end result is not achievable? Possibly weakening the Tories in this might be to your own detriment. So
that's also been the big question, given that the Remainers are rallying around the Lib Dems. This idea of splitting the vote keeps coming up.
Mm-hmm. The vote on the left is definitely split. The Remain vote is definitely split. The question is, how split do you want the Leave vote to be?
That's what I'm saying. The Remain positions. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I've been seeing the concern that if a Brexit Party runs, then split is vote between Tories and Brexit Party, and Labour ends up winning. But why doesn't the same logic apply the other way? That is, Lib Dems and Labour split up some votes, and you end up handing a seat to the other side.
So the Liberal Democrats are have seen what happens when they get a coalition with anyone, which is that things don't go very well for them. And under their new leadership and with the direction of Remain, they're going absolutely ham at it. They want both the current opposition parties to die. They had an interesting interview, I think it was recently, where Joe Swinson has been putting out the leaflets, or the party's been putting out the leaflets for various by-elections. And I think was it the Peterborough by-election? If you saw this, Britisher, just feel free to correct me at any point, or anyone in the chat. And they put up like a poll of if the vote was to be split between two parties, which you want like that vote to be split, and it had basically I think 34% for the Conservatives, 31% for the Liberal Democrats, and 9% for Labour in this constituency, right? And but that's an opinion poll, and they were basically passing it off. This question that they had asked was put in tiny print with this massive bar graph that was there, basically trying to pass off that they had much greater support. When the actual result came in, and they were the ones trailing on about 7%, and the other two parties obviously well up there. I think the Conservatives ended up getting 51 in the end. But so disingenuousness is not exactly new to the Liberal Democrat strategy, certainly at the moment. But the Liberal Democrats basically are putting all their money on this idea that everyone is so disaffected with Labour and the Conservatives that they are the viable option. They also get this idea that if they are the hardest Remain party, then they get to have a minimum, this 48%, which they believe is higher now. They think it's, upwards near 55%. They're trying to play their cards in this idea that most people want to Remain. Most people are going to vote for them, basically on the platform of Remain, and that's all they need. So that's what they're pushing the hardest. Labour doesn't know where it stands. Labour keeps going back and forth. They finally settled on this idea that they would arrange a deal once they were in power, then throw back an option for that deal or remain in a second referendum.
What they would do is they would renegotiate with the EU. The reason they think they could renegotiate with the EU is because it would be a closer alliance with the EU from the one that the EU has so far negotiated.
Yes.
So
it would include things like the guaranteed single market occupancy and stuff like that. Yeah.
But the problem they have is that some of them are effectively arguing we would renegotiate that, we would then put that to the people in a referendum, and then in the referendum we would campaign against it.
Yes, we would also campaign against our deal, and we'd campaign for the option to remain again, which would render everything
looking
moot.
at that and you're just going, what? So you're campaigning against your own deal because you prefer no deal whatsoever, you prefer remain.
So the Labour, apart from in its heartland, very confused at the moment. You've got the Conservatives and the Brexit Party. We haven't really heard masses from the Brexit Party at the moment because I think they don't really need to say anything. I think everyone knows that they're a one-issue party and that's the only thing they'd be interested in.
One thing, perhaps you can help me with this because you're a UKIPper, aren't you? So
yes.
As a UKIP, you're in a fairly similar territory to the Brexit Party.
I cannot in good faith recommend UKIP to vote for at the moment, but yes.
Yeah. No, but the reason I bring that up is, but perhaps you can help me on this because I'm somewhat confused on this. Because there seems to be really rigid, stern opposition towards Boris Johnson's deal, saying it's not good enough.
Yep.
And I really I struggle to see where the massive problem is.
What with Boris Johnson's deal at present?
Yes, because just to give you the basic outline, and then you can go. So basically, what I see is the backstop has been removed. That was really the biggest stumbling block. Most of the things that people are pointing to are finite, so they basically will come to an end.
Well, yes. So the big issues that people have an issue with, especially in Theresa May deal, is some of the things which are finite, things like what do they call it? The withdrawal period, as it were. Mm-hmm. So the sort of transitory section, where it is allowed to be extended at the whim of the European Union. So that took power out of our hands. People didn't like that very much. The other thing was that we would still be paying, obviously, into it. The idea of the departure bill of 39 billion, although a lot of people, I think it's 33 now, and a lot of people are kind of at the moment willing to suck that up in order to just get out by inches, as it were, and try and basically and claw back a bit of sovereignty one piece at a time as it's become clear that the Parliament just simply will not allow us a clean break. The idea that I have really ever since I became a Leaver have always had, because this is the thing people don't get, is once we leave on whatever terms, that's when negotiations begin. We have yet to enter the negotiation period for the trade deals that we wish to employ. So,
a lot of the things I've seen that people have raised as objection are things that they see as what they believe will be conceded in negotiations. Where I sort of feel, well, do we really know this? Do you understand what I mean?
So, like the only things that I know from that withdrawal bill that are set in stone, right, are the divorce bill. There's the basically the maintaining EU regulations along with that, and it putting the power to extend that period in the hands of the EU, which were the big things which these are the shackles that people talk about, right? And these are the things that people who are ardent no dealers want to get away from. These are the things which basically keep Farage relevant with Boris Johnson's deal there. And this is the concession, because it takes, obviously, when we leave and we're in this transitionary period, we don't have our veto anymore. We don't have our votes in the Parliament.
No,
anymore.
I fully understand that, but as I say, I mean, we would be able to walk away from the transitional period. That was the one thing that the backstop didn't allow us to do. So
I think you'll find that it's like the difficulty is, of course, that no one trusts politicians, and so the idea being from the people's point of view that I've spoken to, that if we had managed to get a cleaner break, then they'd be forced into action, as opposed to now where they can do more delays. What's their incentive?
I fully sympathise with that, particularly given the last 3.5 years we've seen. But what I'm sort of thinking is, look, we're effectively, we've got the Tory government, standing for re-election, which clearly has given every indication that if it is given a majority, it will, it will not only be seeking to get out of the EU, but it also intends to mean business, as in the way we got to this renegotiation was with their saying, you will either give us a renegotiation or we're leaving without. And it seems clear to me that that's what moved the EU position.
Yes, it's very clear to me that the Brexit that is being campaigned for at the moment is not leaving the European Union, which is distressing. But the hope is, again, a victory by inches as we go.
You're technically out of the thing. You're now just basically negotiating the future relationship
from a weaker position. This is the difficulty.
Well, I mean, from the best possible position you could achieve once the damage by Theresa May has already been done.
Yes, right. I still think it could have been done better. I still think it could be done better. I don't trust anyone currently in government to be able to achieve that.
Would you have preferred just an outright no deal?
Yeah, and the reason I say yes to that is because as soon as that no deal happens, it becomes very clear to everyone involved on both sides of the negotiating table what they stand to lose and where, because they start to lose it, right? And I think solutions would be found very, very quickly to the things which are going to hurt very much in the short term. And then negotiations will have to be made. In my view, as soon as we had voted, we should have had, obviously the parliaments have said, right, the referendum's come in, arrangements should have been made, a no-deal break should have been made at that point, and then negotiations began in earnest, and it should have taken up the majority of Parliament's time, what we are going to do and do not with regards to what we're going to keep up with the EU and what we're not, and then we can start talking to other people. Because in my mind, the last 3.5 years is basically just the entree to what is going to be even worse bureaucratical nonsense for the next decade.
The problem I see was that part of the text of the initial deal with Theresa May, which which clearly is the basis of this one, kind of stated that deal will form the basis for negotiations for a future trade deal. Which is why this government then apparently they changed quite a bit of the text. I think we can agree none of us have read thing. It's 500 pages long. Apparently they have changed quite a bit of the text that was constantly talking about level playing field and alignment, which is what the Labour Party are now using as part of their opposition to it. Because they say we must stay aligned because that guarantees workers' protections and things like that.
Oh yeah, because the British people are and their own government is incapable of maintaining said protections.
Precisely.
This is my biggest issue with any of the rhetoric that comes out of either Remainers or basically naysayers when it comes to this thing, is the idea that apparently the entirety of the British people and everyone who's also been imported over the last 2 decades has been are complete savages. We're complete barbarians with no cares for anything, especially food standards. We fucking hate those things, right? And what we want to do is go back and live in the Middle Ages and perhaps go out a-conquering again and start building up the navy, right? And
that is after we have slaughtered anybody of a racial minority.
Of course, within any of our cities and so on, as we hunt them like, with the basset hounds in the countryside. I don't know. So it's one of those things where it's just like, the British people have quite a good idea, actually, of the quality of the different products and services that they want and what they have come to expect. And the idea that we would sacrifice that because we're incapable is, because we're just incapable of having those decisions.
I mean, the fact that the sixth largest economy in the world can't look after itself is ridiculous.
Yes.
I grant you that.
I wanted to jump in before we got too far from it. The Lib Dems, you said, think that they can win a majority.
Oh, no, so not necessarily a majority, but they think that they see themselves as potentially becoming the new opposition party on the ashes of Labour.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's possible. It's technically possible. Put it like this. In the polling, the difference in percentage between the Lib Dems and Labour is smaller
than it has ever been.
The difference between Labour and the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
So the third to second position is now more closely contested, really, than the second to first position, if you know what I mean. So I think that's why the Lib Dems have got their hopes up. Personally, I think it will not end anywhere near as positively as they're hoping for. But I can see their thinking. I can see the reason for their thinking. I think their thinking has at least some merit, even though I don't think that's how it eventually will play out.
I know what seemed challenging, that they seem to think that a majority want to remain.
Yes.
And
yes.
Now this is where I might have my own partisan blinders because I'm partial to the Leave side. What do you think of that? I'm wondering if they're dreaming.
They're dreaming.
That's what I thought.
I think
categorically, they're dreaming. Things have not really shifted that much between the Leave and Remain side.
Even having looked at, I had a document with it on that someone shared with me of something like the past 30 polling options, right? The last 30 polls on Leave Remain sentiment, and it shows that it basically shifts from it's according to the majority of them all, marginally for Remain, right? But it's still in the region of this 51-49 figure. Not to mention that enough people respect democracy. Also, I hope this is a thing which I've heard from many Remainers as well, is that they would, there's the difference between being given the option of a second referendum and but more people oppose the idea of a second referendum in its entirety, because democracy itself is under fire here.
And because they don't want immediately, within 2 weeks after that, to have a Scottish independence referendum.
Also that, yes. So it's a tricky one, but I feel like at least the respect for democracy in this country is higher than a lack of respect for this particular vote. Anyway, right. Let me see what we've got here. Architect of Fate donated $10. Thank you, very generous. And said, I saw the tweets about AA's feelings towards the both of you. That'd be you and me, Britisher. I would advise getting ahead of this story with a tell-all before Project Veritas releases the video of what he did with the Britisher's jar. So if I share this on OBS, and I will link the tweet in the chat for you, Radlib. It's going to go into the stream chat here. So AA says, don't accuse me of loving Not So Obvious and Britisher behind the scenes again, in reply to someone saying men tend to insult you to your face and love you behind your back. Women love your face but insult your back. Rules of the competition, I guess. And, of course, I'm just saying he can't help it. AA is infatuated with me. You guys should see all the disgusting fan mail he writes in my DMs.
Well, at least it means that the academic agent acknowledges us men.
Compared to, what is he called? Is he been calling you a sissy behind the scenes? Is that right, British? So that's the academic agent link there. Invidious says, I do get veg. Oh, yes, this is the chap who, with his 26 pence breakfast.
Oh, yes.
Sort of thing. He
Yes.
says, I do get veg. 21 pence for a tin of peas, 20 pence for a tin of carrots, 21 pence for a bag of instant mash, and 30p for a tin of beans. 18 pence per slice of beans on toast.
Well, I think one thing we would need to ask him. This is Mr. Invidious, is it?
Yes. Invidious.
The one thing we need to ask him is it any good?
Yeah, I've eaten some grim stuff over the years, but even on my budget, I've never stooped to tinned peas. I think I'd rather starve.
I've had tinned peas. They're not that bad. No, but
they're okay.
when I'm just sort of wondering, on this diet he describes, is it kind of a hair shirt thing? Is this some kind of suffrage, a kind of martyrdom, if you know what I mean? Or
I think he just really enjoys.
Is it actually just something he quite enjoys because he's becoming accustomed to it, perhaps in the past?
I think he enjoys the maths, the satisfaction of trying to get that figure as low as possible, more so than perhaps he enjoys it. But at the same time, he's just quite a thrifty person anyway, and I'm sure he's eating what he enjoys. But I budget myself. Worry about £4 to £5 a day, so not too bad. About £150 a month, including treats, and that's not too bad for me. And I still manage to get in. I eat 400 grams of chicken or fish a day, so it doesn't bother me. Have I just left a gulf here?
There's not much. There's not many places to go to.
No, it's fair. I wonder whether or not
of a springboard to something else.
I mean, to be fair, I do sprinkle your jar with fish flakes from time to time, and that's about as far as your nutritional
That's where the
content
smell comes
goes.
from.
Well, no, the smell comes from your rampant gonorrhea, but we don't talk about that on stream, right? I'm so sorry.
You said you wouldn't. I thought we'd agreed we wouldn't bring up my relationship with the academic agent.
You told me not to mention the syphilis, but I said nothing about the gonorrhea. The Harry channel donated $10 and says, "Oh, we're back on the Romans now. I think, or at least history." Are we ready?
Did you do Silly Sailor?
Have I done Silly Sailor? Oh, let me see.
Did you jump forward there?
Oh, I have jumped forward. Bear with. Let me see. Unfortunately, this is a bit. Oh, there. Okay, so Silly Sailor says Britisher advised Constantine to declare for Mithras and has held a grudge over being ignored ever since. Mithraism ho. So there's that.
Very, very much so. Yes, absolutely.
You know about this, right, Britisher?
Mithras.
I had to look it up, but it was like a Zoroastrian thing, and Mithras was supposed to be like friends with Sol, and
yes, it was very much the soldiers' religion. It had a very strong following in the late Roman Empire. It had a very strong following among the soldiers for some reason, and he is constantly, represented as sacrificing the bull. So whenever you see a sort of a statue of what do they call that cap again that you always saw? It's a sort of sign of republicanism. Is it a Phrygian cap? I think he's wearing a Phrygian cap, and he's sort of slitting the throat of the bull, and I think they found statues like that by the hundreds, if you know what I mean. I think I might.
It says it was wiped out by the end of the 4th century, with Christianity gaining the ascendance in the Roman Empire.
The Christians, the Christians sort of did away with them, if you know what I mean. But it was very, very strongly followed among the troops for some reason. It was very much sort of seen as a bit of a macho religion.
Well,
balls.
Like directly related to this, Harry Channel did say. Wasn't the cult of Mithras also popular and monotheistic at the same time, helping prepare the people for Christianity?
Yes, it just seemed to be the way religion was heading. So as if there was kind of some evolution afoot, if you know what I mean. One was gradually sort of turning away from the sort of pantheon one had previously known.
And it makes logistical sense, right? Like if you end up rallying more people behind a single deity, then you end up with a much larger negotiating block, shall we call it?
I'm just wondering. I believe that was it called the Taurobolum or something like that, where they sacrifice a bull. I don't think that was directly connected to Mithras, but I believe that form of sacrifice existed long before that, but it may have been connected with it. I'm not sure. For those people who have seen the series Rome, there was an example of that. That basically the bull gets sacrificed by having his throat slit, and of course, with it being a bull, it's a very large animal. You can imagine there is a lot of blood. So if you are effectively standing under a grate under the area in which the bull is sacrificed, you are literally showered in the warm blood of the animal.
In a delicious and nutritious breakfast, yes.
Well, you could imagine how that might have a sort of effect, particularly the warmth of it.
Yeah, especially on
like
Cheerios.
A power coming down on you, if you know what I mean.
Look, I have to say that with Cheerios it can be a bit gristly, but it's better on whole wheat toast.
I think it was called a Taurobolum or something like that. That form of sacrifice with some person who obviously is there to make some kind of spiritual connection or whatever, being literally showered in the warm blood of the beast.
I had always kind of gotten the idea that the polytheism worked out quite well for the Roman Empire for quite some time, because they would conquer someone or be absorbing a new people, and they'd take their gods and just chuck them right into the pantheon and say, hey, look, we're one big happy family, right? And I wonder, and here's where my knowledge of the late Roman Empire breaks, or the late Western Roman Empire breaks down, I'm not sure. I wonder if, as we get towards Constantine's time, there's less absorbing to be worried about, and it's more just consolidate the gains that are there and try not to lose them.
Yes.
You follow me? So there's less need to incorporate more gods, and it's more about uniting.
Yes. Yeah. With the incorporating, the Romans developed yet another trick, so that early on the Romans would incorporate. So they would do exactly what you say. They would take someone else's god and simply make it their own. Oh, this is another one in our club.
Right.
But then as they went on, they found a new trick. And that is, this god of yours, this is a god of the forest, is it? Okay, yeah. We've got the same god. With us, he's called Silvanus. So your name for the forest god, that's just your name for it. It's the same god we worship. So they would then build temples to Silvanus / something, whatever the local deity is called. Right. So you kind of have this hybrid god, which it's the same god, it's just two different names.
Yeah, it's just a sort of transitional thing, right?
Yeah,
we're going to transition you from what you're used to into our scene, and we're going to make it as painless as possible.
By the next time we rebuild this temple, he will be Silvanus.
Sure. Shall we go right to the next Roman question here?
Well, I can see the Harry channel saying there is a theory that the imagery of blood in the Gospels was emphasized for marketing purposes to convert Mithras followers to Christianity.
I would not at all be surprised. Yes, I believe the blood of the bull had some sort of role to play in the role of the universe or whatever. So,
people have been asking Dominic in particular whether or not it's what I filled your brain jar with to keep you sated. But I've said that I poured the blood into one of those testing machines that that medical professionals use to separate the platelets from the plasma. And the plasma itself is a clear liquid, and that's what I pour into your jar. So I can continue to shake you like a snow globe.
It's just some yes. So I'm in a snow globe, not in a Mithraeum.
No,
that's the
you might be.
That's the Mithraic temple. Is a Mithraeum.
You might end up. Yes, I have been in Sargon's Athens server. The
Oh, there is a myth. Well, given that I haven't, you have the advantage of.
Oh yes, everything is named after to various of these things. In the Athens server, there's the Mithraeum, the Amphitheatron, the Ecclesia, the Agora, all this stuff, you know. But anyway, enough shilling of Sargon's channel. He's got enough viewers. You may well be a brain in a snow globe in a Mithraeum, all of your own, Britisher. Who knows at this point?
Well, there you go.
If you can consider my office and the dusty shelf you occupy a Mithraeum. But there you go.
Well, then again, I mean, you are the person whom the aliens see as tending to my jar. So, who do you think they will conclude it has the upper hand in the sort of master-servant relationship? The person who just sits in the jar, or the one who has to tend to it?
I think probably the one who, when he gets pissed off with the jar, can throw it around the room like a kind of frisbee.
I mean, I don't remember which stand-up comic it was anymore, but someone said, when aliens observe our planet, they will conclude that the dogs are the masters, because once they see, human beings picking up the feces of the dogs as they're walking and carrying them with them. Who would you conclude is the master in that relationship?
Well, I still maintain the tradition of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that cars are more likely to be seen. Vehicles of any description.
Particularly due to all the beautiful women we drape over them in catalogues. Or we did before #MeToo came along.
Before MeToo. Okay. So Jack says for 20 CZK. What is this? What is this currency?
CZK, could that be Czech?
That is a Czech koruna. Or koruna? Koruna. Very nice. First time I've received that. Thank you very much for your donation. It says, where does Britisher rank Aurelian among emperors?
Aurelian. So this is the gentleman who built the wall of Rome.
You cut out a little bit there for me, Britisher. Could you just say that again?
He's the gentleman who built the wall in Rome, the Aurelian walls.
Yeah.
The walls, for those people who haven't been to Rome, the walls are still there around the ancient city.
He also beat up the Goths a bit, if I recall.
Sorry?
He did beat up the Goths a bit, if I recall. Right?
Oh, he was generally... The reason I don't have much of a soft spot for Aurelian is that he was a bit of a martinet. I think that's why at first one didn't really want him. So this is the disciplinarian type. This is if AA becomes emperor, if you know what I mean.
Okay, Aurelian or Tacitus?
So he was. Yes, he was very good with the Goths. He definitely stood his ground. I think what was it they referred to him as? Something liberator mundi, like that. Somehow savior or freer of the world, or something like that.
He was restitutor orbis. Yeah,
orbis. Okay, yes, same
of the world. Yeah.
He definitely made a reputation for himself simply for being a very sort of competent commander, if you know what I mean. But as such, more than likely, just even if you just see his likeness, he doesn't strike you as one of the nicest people in the world. That brings me to one little anecdote, that the one time I went to Rome, I went there with a friend, and we went to the Capitoline Museum. And there are 2 or 3 rooms in the Capitoline Museum that, if you are interested in Roman history, will just simply blow your mind. Because they have dozens and dozens of busts on several layers, of shell.
Mm.
So if you basically recognize these folks from history, it's something to take in. I mean, there are just dozens of them just looking at you from all angles of the room as you're walking around. And you just, basically, you can put a name to pretty much each one of them. And there was a bust of young Commodus. And I just looked at my friend and went, what do you think? And he kind of just looked at him and went, please tell me they didn't make this one emperor. And I went, I'm afraid they did.
Oh dear.
I said, it didn't end well. He said,
You're saying just looking at him, you could
just
you could see
looking at the youth. So this was basically not the chap who became emperor, but this was just the youth. And the artist had obviously managed to flatter him by making the bust look, impressive and whatever. But he had still managed to capture sufficient of the character that even millennia later, you look at it and go, "Oh, good God!" It sends a bit of a shiver down your spine. And without any context, he simply looked at it, and obviously realizing that this was a room full of rulers and emperors, he just said, "Please tell me they didn't make this one emperor." And I went, "I'm afraid they did, and he was horrible."
It doesn't look that bad to me. I'm pulling up Commodus bust. He's got a beard, right?
Yes, but that is a later one. So perhaps if you look for young Commodus, there is one, and that there is something in there that just
before he grew the beard.
It's something there that's just nasty, and he managed whoever the artist was managed to capture it perfectly.
Wow, that's awesome.
Lovely. Let me see what we've got here. So Adam Morgan says, would Hippocrates II medically treat racists today?
Have you heard you've heard the story, I guess, right? I mean, well, that would be doing
British
harm,
British has got just a terrible fear of hippos, and whenever you mention it, it sets him out into hysterics. Go on.
That would be doing harm, right? Because if we keep racists alive, then we're platforming racists in the sense of being alive as being
apply to racists. Is this just a very clever question someone has thought up in order to tickle us? Or does this refer to a story?
Oh, you don't know?
No, I don't know.
Oh, dear. Yeah. Was it the NHS, Mark? I'm trying to remember.
Let me see.
Basically, they've got some rule that if patients use racist language, the hospital can just kick them out.
I haven't heard this.
I was just seeing it today.
Let me see. Let me see what I can find here.
Racist Bristol, Southmead Hospital.
Oh, here we are. Yes.
Racist patients could have treatment withdrawn.
Red card to racism.
Red card to racism. Okay.
North Bristol NHS Trust has today launched a Red Card to Racism campaign to protect all staff from any discrimination. Following a national trend, staff have reported that incidents of racism on wards have increased over the past year, so the hospital will be enforcing its zero-tolerance policy against abusive behaviour. This is, by the way, from the North Bristol NHS Trust website.
Yeah, gotcha. I have a BBC story on the same thing. Just the idea, that seems horrendously open to abuse just from the point of view of, let's call it, dementia patients.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Since I was just visiting my mother in Florida, who has dementia.
And she was very racist towards you. She said, "Get out of my room, white boy." Is that what she said?
We're quite fortunate. My mom is actually rather more pleasant since dementia has set in.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, this is intriguing because yesterday I must have caught a part of a report which was on about this subject without knowing it because I didn't see the beginning of it. What I caught was an interview with an Indian, whether he is British in nationality, but he was clearly of Indian descent, who was a doctor at a hospital. And they were asking him questions regarding what would constitute racism. So now it more than likely suggests that it was in Bristol, if you know what I mean. But one thing I found intriguing, and that was when they asked him, if someone, for example, were to ask you whether they could be seen by a white doctor,
yes,
would that constitute racism? And his answer was yes. And I sort of felt this is an interesting one because he hasn't actually insulted you. Do you understand what I mean? So
microaggressions, microaggressions. The
insult is the inference you draw from that.
I suppose,
of course, yes.
to my mind, there's a difference between saying, "Can I be seen by a white doctor?" and "I need to see a doctor who could speak better English than you're speaking to me right now because I don't understand a word you say."
But do you understand what I mean? You sort of think, well, perhaps a person who is sufficiently old might indeed have, what we would consider racist views, but is still nonetheless polite enough not to express them. Do you understand what I mean? Now, where do you draw the line with that? So when I heard that, I sort of felt, I feel quite uncomfortable with this definition of it.
Yes.
That when we think of racists, we kind of know what we mean. It's basically,
Also, if someone,
it's Richard Spencer going berserk in a rant.
Also,
that's what we're thinking.
When it comes to I can see people in the chat say, so much for the Hippocratic Oath and stuff like that. But let's say someone hypothetically, you're a doctor now, Richard, comes up to you and says, "I'd like to see a white doctor instead of you, you filthy continental." Right? Then you have it's the NHS. You could just say, "No, I'm what you've got," right? And if they want to choose to walk out of there, that's their right as much as it is. But you shouldn't be able to refuse treatment. Now, it's different to harassment, which is also got its own specific definition.
I have a wonderful example of a good old friend of mine who sadly isn't with us anymore, who worked in a fish and chip shop.
Go on.
And someone came in, and he'd more than likely this chap was Scottish, so in keeping with his vernacular, I will say this chap came in and more than likely had perhaps had a bevy or two, if you understand my drift. But of course, this was in England.
Pissed as a fart. Yep, go on.
And he obviously he was known to be Scottish. He
was known to be diseased as a Scottish.
So this chap came in and said, "Give me a portion of chips, you Scottish bastard." So now you sort of think, okay, so various versions of escalation are possible here.
Mm-hmm.
But what did he do? He looked at him and went, "That's Mr. Scottish bastard to me."
Dealt with it with class.
That's great. That's a great response.
And you just, you have to take your hat off to him. That was fantastic, particularly because he only stood about 5 foot tall.
Amazing.
But it was a sort of sensational move.
I did have
all this sort of thing.
Disarm a situation.
I did have a friend who...
sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I did have a friend who went travelling, ended up in Cuba, and they went out, they had a few drinks, they came back to the hostel they were staying in. Must have been 20, 30 years ago now. And he said, we came in, there was this enormous, we were bumping around trying to get ready for bed. There was an enormous noise from this chap on the bunk next to us in a very heavy Scottish accent, telling us he was very much going to kill us if we made much more than another peep. Of course, terrified of, and they can't see anything in the dark either, so they just hear this gruff voice, assuming it to be a giant. When they woke up in the morning, it was this chap. It was a dwarf, this Scottish dwarf, about 3'8", who had been shouting at them, and has been hung over himself, and not very happy to have his recovery and recuperation interrupted by these two noisy gentlemen coming in. And anyway, enough of that.
Part of the reason I'm bothered by this sort of thing, besides just the creeping wokeness seeming to close in a way, is that I've had some folks that I suppose would be classified as racist by today's standards who were quite dear to me, or I admired or learned a lot from. One was a Japanese professor when I was taking engineering, who would regularly tell us that compared to Japanese students, we were pretty useless, but he was one of my favorite professors, and I think I highlighted him as one of my favorites and thanked him later near the end of my time at university. And then my jazz piano teacher, Pops Porter, was somebody who, came back from the Chicago and the 20s and 30s or whatever, and he had, some older attitudes maybe. But he was a great guy and a great teacher, and I wrote a lot of sort of essays about him and what it was like to have a relationship with him. And so, it seems like for some people, you just you put the label racist on someone, and then you just sort of dismiss them from the human race. And to me, it's just, in these cases, this was sort of an eccentricity of these gentlemen, shall we say, that I was able to overlook and still benefit from them quite a bit.
It's one of those things where it all depends on definitions. We know that these are really controversial topics that, depending on which group and which people you speak to, they all have different ideas about, like, the difference between race and ethnicity and culture and tradition and what's instantiated and what's genetic and what's what. So I just think that you're going to cause yourself so much more trouble than it's worth. Aside from someone walking into the NHS, into an NHS trust, into a doctor's office, and saying, F you N-word, right, to whoever's going on there, right, which in and of itself is already covered by our current anti-harassment legislation, because it's a targeted attack on a single member of staff for no given reason, right?
Right.
It's already covered by harassment legislation, in the same way as, and I dread to mention this because British will have palpitations, in the same way that the upskirting bill that was floated by Theresa May's government was unnecessary because it was already covered by harassment law. So there's no need. Yeah.
It's never enough.
There's no need for it.
It's never enough. You already have harassment. You already have hate speech. Now we need to kick racists out of hospitals.
But what you end up doing is covering basically kind of, you're broadening the terms under which you can refuse someone treatment, and I don't like that at all. Especially if someone who could be considered of sound mind or unsound mind is also an arbitrary definition, unless you are hospitalized for something, dementia or a stroke or something like that. If someone walks in on a drug but you don't know what it is, or you're not sure what's going on, and they start hurling abuse at people in the thing, you don't say, right, kick him out the hospital, we're not having anything to do with this guy. You have to strap them down, work out what's going on, and so on and so forth. I just find the whole idea to be kind of grossly overstepping the bounds of what the point of the NHS was, which is, it doesn't matter your colour or your creed or anything, you get access to treatment free at the point of delivery. So,
well, if I can just interrupt on of course my favourite subject in the world, which is in this case a tweet that has been sent to all three of us from a gentleman called Jack Sanders.
Yes, indeed.
I've just put it in the YouTube chat. I don't know if it's visible to anyone but me.
So those are the rooms I'm talking. So I think you can imagine, if you have sort of read a bit about the Roman emperors and whatever, and you've in the books they had the portrait photographs of the various emperors, so you're kind of familiar with their visages, and then you walk into those rooms.
Wow.
Yes, I think you can imagine that you're having a bit of a tiz at that particular moment.
I miss this. I miss this in my visits to Rome.
It's the Capitoline Museum, so it's just
sounds
on
great.
the Capitoline Hill. So the Capitoline Hill has various claims to fame. The square itself, I believe, is designed by none other than Michelangelo. So Michelangelo de Buonarroti had a hand in designing the square with those kind of steps that go up to it, I believe. Also, it still has the old Roman ramp going up to it from the level of the Forum. So it's one of those sort of few places where, other than in the Forum, which is pretty much all wrecked, if you know what I mean, where you're walking on a bit of ancient Roman road, if you know what I mean.
So is this quite close to the Forum?
Yes, this pretty much would overlook the Forum. It would be on the Capitoline Hill that kind of looks down onto the Forum. It's it really is one of the museums. Yes.
It's incredible. One question: these are not reproductions.
No, these are the real
busts.
ones.
I assumed so.
I was just going to say it's fascinating.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's just a fascinating testament to basically the resilience of this kind of all this historical architecture. Because you think about enormous buildings and what's contained within them surviving these things. Because obviously they're grand monuments to great civilizations, cultures, and whatever. But most of the other stuff, you find, I mean, aside from the regular workings of broken pots and whatnot and tools, but the remarkable accuracy and skill of the craftsman is shown. Not to mention just the idea that so many of them are here through time. It's a wonderful record.
Yeah, that basically, the generations that followed deemed it worthy of preserving these things.
Yes,
I believe in that museum is also one of the busts of Scipio Africanus. So yeah, these are the originals. You've effectively got sort of three grades. You've got one museum, which is sort of the Museum of Civilization, Roman civilization, that I believe actually Mussolini started, that is slightly on the outskirts of Rome. It's where, I don't know if it's still there, when I went, that is where the large model of the city of Rome is. It's this huge model of Rome at the size of, at the time of Constantine the Great, and you're kind of looking down onto it from a balcony, if you know what I mean. It's vast and it's beautiful. And in that, they pretty much have copies, so they try and tell the story of Rome, but obviously they haven't got the original busts, so they've got kind of plaster cast copy busts in there. In this one, in the Capitoline Museum, you've got lots of busts of the emperors and the imperial families and so on. I believe they also have got the famous bronze Roman wolf with Romulus and Remus suckling. That is also in that museum.
Whoa.
But when it comes to the premier class of busts and statues, they're not there. Because you have to then think of the passing of time and who held power. So the premier class, so the greatest busts of Julius Caesar and Augustus, and the standing statues of Emperor Claudius and so on, they are in the Vatican. Because, of course, over time, the Pope was the one who, had the power, so he managed to secure the greatest ones, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So those are probably the ones I got to see. That's the Capitoline Museum. But I won't make that mistake again if I ever get the good fortune to be back.
But it is in that museum. He's got the window behind him, I believe, so that makes it tricky to photograph. Because you've got the light coming from the same direction in which you photograph. So that's why he perhaps isn't on many photographs. But it's the young Commodus. And when you see that bust, you can see the kind of villainy within that child. And I mean, the situation with Commodus was such that when a rumor once spread that Marcus Aurelius, the old emperor, had died, one of his generals in the east immediately rebelled because he was undyingly loyal to Marcus Aurelius, but under that boy he would not serve. And it then came to light that it was a false alarm. Marcus Aurelius is still alive. He fell on his sword and killed himself.
Oh wow!
And Marcus Aurelius basically said, "Okay, look, we'll draw a veil over this. This never happened. I don't want anybody further punished." Because I understand that all these people were completely loyal. They just hate my son. And so there must have been signs that even Marcus Aurelius wasn't quite blind to. but he still couldn't bring himself not to leave the empire to his son. So that was his ultimate weakness.
Right. And as we end that particular track of thought,
which once again was the Romans. I apologise.
No, don't at all. I tell you, I can see people in chat have been talking about things like, aside from the third bust is immoral, right? And classic Britisher always going on about his favourite topic, busts. There is also a call for you to genuinely do a tour throughout Rome or Italy, any of the Roman sites, basically, and to upload that to your channel. There's interest there, yes. Just so you're aware.
Yes. Who's the guy you just introduced us to, Jules or whatever, who walks around London? Yes, we want the Britisher doing the same thing, except like in Rome.
Yeah.
Well, my friend did say that I somehow made the forum come alive, because obviously when you're looking at it, for most tourists, it's just a pile of rubble. It's very difficult to identify everything. Whereas I could basically tell him where, what was what.
Right.
What happened in which building.
I was able to appreciate the Artitis, see the menorah on it. That was an intense emotional experience for me to see that, knowing that this was the celebration of the sacking of Jerusalem.
And you know what that built, don't you?
Oh, you mean the treasure from Jerusalem? But what did they use it for?
Colosseum.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Yes, so one believes that actually some Jewish slaves will have been used to do some of the sort of hard labor at the Colosseum. And the sacking of Jerusalem and the treasure that you see, being brought home by Titus' troops, was used to build the Colosseum.
Well, I'll tell you what, British. We know full well that there are plenty of Roman sites in the UK as well as abroad. So perhaps perhaps as a test, you could head to one of these Roman palaces or something like that, and take a walk down memory lane there and see how it does. I genuinely think that would be a good idea. So
what if you suddenly get like 1 million views? And suddenly this channel becomes a real income flow,
I mean, think about the headaches you could give AA, like on top of his already lesioned brain.
Of course, the one thing I would most like to do, to just annoy everybody, would of course be to go down to Pompeii and do a tour of all the rude mosaics and frescoes, because a great many of them have survived.
So I have a story, Britisher.
Go ahead.
My Latin teacher he was my Latin teacher throughout all 6 years, both in middle school and what we call high school. And he was quite a character. And we went to Europe, some of us from that high school together. And a couple of us went in on a book of Pompeii, pornography in essence. And then presented it to him and got to watch his face turn red as we presented this to our Latin teacher, our beloved Latin teacher. Anyway, it was great fun.
I love that. That is the way to embarrass. That's the proper way to embarrass somebody, because it's perfectly scholarly,
Right, but, right.
Yes, everybody knows what they're thinking. Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, on that note, I believe it may be in Herculaneum. So, because the two cities were destroyed in different ways, weren't they?
They were. Right. I was so gutted I couldn't get. I got down to Pompeii, but I didn't get round to Herculaneum.
Well, there is one of the great, possibly one of the great treasures of mankind that has been found there, and that is a library. And due to the nature in which the city was struck, the scrolls that were in the library, which until now were all thought to have just basically been destroyed, been made completely illegible,
ruined or incinerated.
One has actually found a way to make them legible again. The problem is, it is one of those, labors of Sisyphus, it will take forever and ever and ever. So one is capable of basically opening those scrolls up, but only sort of, because they're so brittle, sort of chip by chip will kind of break off, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And to the eye, they're perfectly black. But if you kind of, assemble all these chips to be back together again to form the actual page as you've unrolled it,
it is legible.
If you put it under ultraviolet light, apparently the writing can be read. Now, you have to understand that with a great many scholars of the ancient world, we only have fragments of their writings. Now, here is an actual ancient library. Now, it may well take centuries to make this stuff legible again, over.
But it could be one of the greatest contributions to filling those gaps.
It might mean that, take, for example, Archimedes. I believe there are only 4 snippets of his writings that are actually available, as opposed to the literal books the man wrote. So if one does find some of these kind of lost works, it could, literally fill massive gaps. The question is simply, which scrolls is it in? I mean, they all pretty much just look like briquettes, if you know what I mean.
Yes, you've got to. It's just a brute force technique, isn't it? You can't just select.
Yeah. But one is working on it, but it will take a vast amount of time until one has gone through these things.
Is every single worker in that library you, but from a different period of your life? That's what I'm curious.
Well, I mean, who knows? I may have been. I may have been the one who broke into the library and just made sure that the 2 or 3 rude scrolls I wrote when I was back there have since disappeared, so that they can't be identified.
Fury Kitten in chat. I'm sorry, I have to I apologise for my outburst. Says, "What do these scrolls say at the end? Epsteinus didn't kill himself." It's just like the first.
Well, that is precisely one of the scrolls that I had to disappear.
Yes, too much scroll posting that you were doing at the time. Right.
I think it was also the other scroll that I also had to make sure it disappeared. Is the scroll that ends in "and are traps gay?"
Yes, and then answers the question conclusively in a 12-page treatise. But
yeah, Aristotle does so. Yeah.
Right. Let's move along, shall we? So, Architect of Fate says, "I already sent Britisher leggings to the Discord some weeks ago. Please use them as an alpha version." Yes, the market demand for Britisher leggings is higher than any other piece of merch I've been asked to produce. It's up around 3 people now, Britisher, so just be aware that clearly the revenue is going to come flooding in for those. But definitely, if again, a reminder that
I will buy a wheelbarrow in order to hold
all your cash. Yes.
So I've got to share something. I really like the. I'm still not done laughing at the jokes. The Epstein didn't kill himself jokes.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried a quick Latin translation to see what it would look like in proper Latin. I ended up using Epstein did not commit suicide.
Okay.
And I got, I'll skip the first word for a moment, and the hominis non sibi mortem, which sounds roughly right. My Latin's pretty rusty. But Epstein got translated as herpes virus. HERPESVIRUS. One word. What?
Herpes virus?
What? I don't know what this means. So I'm going to try translating back herpes virus to English. This is Google Translate. Infection. So Epstein was translated as the Latin word infection, I guess.
Well, if I may, because we all know that once again I'm going in. When it comes to, I don't know which one it was. I'm assuming it was Pompeii. There is a particular skeleton that one found among pretty much a large group of skeletons of people who, one thinks, died. Basically, who had managed to get to the port. They were pretty much sheltering in one of the sheds, and were obviously hoping for rescue by sea. So they must have all perished there. But one of the skeletons throws up a massive question, because according to the scientists, that skeleton shows signs of syphilis. And syphilis is believed to have come from the New World.
Yes, where it was only prevalent in llamas.
So the fact that there is a skeleton in Pompeii that shows signs of syphilis means that either time travel has been proven, or that, there might have been some parallel evolution of the same disease.
Are you trying to tell us,
or,
Britisher, are you trying to tell us that your skeleton has finally been discovered?
Well, there is that. Well, you see, maybe it's not my skeleton. Maybe it's the skeleton of the old gentleman who passed the time machine on to me.
Or perhaps
having
merely
received it from somebody else.
Or perhaps merely a protege or a companion. Yes.
Because I can assure you that I have absolutely no idea how this apparatus works. I just press the buttons.
Yes, it's idiot proof. It just says jump. Dominic saying llamas are notoriously promiscuous. Yes. This is something I read the other day. Let me just see if I pull this up 1 second. Where it says, where's it gone? We go to media here. Oh, the joy. Might have put this in a different chat. Yes, here we are. It says, let's talk about how syphilis didn't appear in Europe till after Columbus came back from America, but didn't exist in people from the Americas either until then. Let's talk about how the only animal syphilis was found in before then was llamas. Are you implying what I think you are? So that's the thing.
So are you saying that Christopher Columbus had some Welsh members of crew?
And they just mistook the local populace for rather leggy brides? Is that what it was? Oh dear.
But then again, it wouldn't have been Christopher Columbus, wouldn't it? Would have been Pizarro.
Yes, yes, I know. It's a meme from wherever, it could be Tumblr for all I'm not trusting too much to the historical accuracy, but I do think it was amusing.
I am one of the people who still thinks that the Spanish conquistadores get a bit of a bad press.
Really?
Yes, I think that
Britisher watched Apocalypto and was so taken by Mel Gibson's.
Yeah, I think precisely that. I think if you basically come upon something like that, you more than likely won't take too well to it. Your reaction to pyramids on top of which people's hearts get cut out is more than likely not going to be, we have to think about diversity here and show tolerance and understanding.
Let's preserve this beautiful culture.
Yeah, your view is more than likely going to be, good God, we have to get rid of these devil men. So not only do you have to look at it with the attitude of the people of the late 15th, early 16th century, but at the same time, even with our modern sensibilities, I've got the feeling if you were to come across something like that, you would not take too well to it.
And my understanding is that they did not genocide people as a general thing. I mean, setting aside bringing over diseases from the old world, right? But in terms of just outright slaughtering, I don't think the Spanish did that so much. They did quite a bit of enslaving.
I mean, you do have to.
They didn't just outright wipe populations out.
You do also have to,
in the way that another empire I could name would sometimes do.
You do have to remember as well that things like bullets were expensive. And actually, it would be quite costly to genocide entire groups of people.
Yes, I think that the Spaniards who arrived there spent a lot of time overawing people. If you had metal armor and cannons that could make loud booms
and clear forest, and you could build great stone churches. Yes,
you would have a certain effect on the native population, which I believe also the other empire that you were too timid to mention also engaged in quite a bit. It's quite good to arrive at a little island in which folks live in grass skirts and salute the local king with sort of 12-gun salute or something like that. Once that's happened, he's more than likely not going to put up too much of a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Just reminds me of what is it, Evil Dead? Have you watched Evil Dead, Britisher?
You're talking about his speech to the primitives with his.
Oh yes, in the third installment. Yes.
Yeah.
Army of Darkness. That's one.
I could almost have quoted that speech at a certain point. It's so funny. So great.
This is my boomstick. Yes.
Yes.
Amazing how few times he reloads that, given how much he fires it. Yes. Dylan98 says thoughts on Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk. I have not.
Yeah. Have you? I've followed this quite closely. Pretty sure you followed this at all.
You'll have to help me here, because I've had sort of various names thrown at me. Nick Fuentes rings a bell, but I may be misapplying him. So, are we talking about the alt-right here?
Nick Fuentes fancies himself kind of like the alt-right Milo, as it were. He's a bit of a...
Let's call it... Let's be a little more neutral, because I think that might be fair, and just call it the dissident right versus conservative Inc., which is more what Charlie Kirk would be representing.
So is this Groyal something?
Groypers. Yeah, all that stuff.
The toad of Pepe, yes.
I don't want to go on about it here, because on the cigar stream Friday night, when I was literally streaming from an airport lounge, I was involved with a quite good discussion on all of this, and in particular whether the Groypers might be the thing that Paul Gottfried was really looking for when he gave his speech 10 years ago on the alternative right, which Richard Spencer heard and took and went into the alt-right thing. But I think my old friend Paul had something rather more like this in mind, which is that there are certain questions and people who raise those questions that just get deplatformed by the conservative movement, going back to William Buckley in the 60s. And he wanted to see that come to an end and let us discuss these things that have been undiscussable.
Okay.
In conservative right.
They've risen up recently because Charlie Kirk's been making some statements, and he's the guy who runs Turning Point USA, isn't it?
I think they're just yes, that's right. Turning Point USA, Point UK, and I think it's more that here's a platform to start raising these questions and make these people squirm, because they won't give honest answers. They just dodge and weave. I mean, it's similar to dealing with politicians, right? Where you can't get them to actually you can't pin them down and get them to take a position, right? But it's that same kind of exercise.
Can I ask, from a position of, I assure, not pretended naivete, what are the questions that one can't ask conservatives?
Right. So one of the things they brought up was about immigration, because, as you know, there are some who aren't totally on board with a lot of immigration on the right.
Okay. Yeah.
But the official right tends to be pro-immigration.
Oh,
so you've got
I would have thought now with Trumpism that one would effectively, with the build the wall crowd, that would be the official right these days. But
well, they resist it as hard as they can, because this official right has been around a long time. You've heard of never Trumpers. These would be people who come out of this conservative Inc. Type crowd. They've been around a long time, and they've have certain positions on things. And even with Trump pressing them, you don't see Charlie Kirk saying build the wall. But when the immigration question comes up from the Groyper, for instance, he's like basically taking a pro, well, not just pro-immigration stand, but a pro rather large amount of immigration stand, which is not popular among, so
it's quite directly, it's directly related to Israel, wasn't it?
It's the classic disconnect between the elite, the leadership, and the people, where the leadership is not really representing what most of the people think, and people eventually are getting sick of it and saying, hey. I
only saw one example and it kind of left me somewhat bemused. It seemed to be a kind of trolling question in nature.
Yes, some of them were.
If anything, it seemed to have touches of anti-Semitism, but at the same time, it was such a bizarre question that you were kind of wondering, where on earth are we going here? Some chap in a MAGA hat, kind of took to the microphone and asked them something about how well Jews can dance or something like that.
Right.
And I was just sort of sitting there going, what? It really... And that's really the limit of my input, that I've actually received on this subject. And I kind of looked at it and went,
I
"What
think you may
on earth?"
You may have missed what he was doing there. Everything, including the thing about Jews dancing, all of that was only to do one thing, and that was for him to say, "Google dancing Israelis." And if you actually do that, you'll quickly see why he was pulling that little stunt. And that's because, as was covered on Fawkes of all places at the time, there were some folks who were pretty happy when September 11th was happening, and eventually this story kind of got buried. But at the time, it was pretty well publicly known, and so some people want to draw attention to that.
Okay, well, in that case, this is something I was completely unaware of. The only thing I was aware of in terms of dancing when the 9/11 thing happened was one of those moments where I felt Yasser Arafat shone, and that is when people were coming out in Palestine and they were cheering. Arafat appeared on television and said, "Get off the streets." And he seemed to be quite genuinely dismayed. And he was sort of saying, "Have you any idea what the people of the world are going to think of us when they see you dancing on the street in celebration of this outrage?" And I must sort of say, it was one of those moments when you felt the old goat had something in him,
Yeah.
Where he kind of came out and he was truly appalled. You could sort of sense, and he just get off the street, and within minutes the streets were clear.
Yeah,
and just the authority of this one old man.
Basically, he was saying, "Optics, guys."
Well,
right?
To be honest, I think it was. I think to his credit, it was more than just optics. It really was. It seemed to come from within his marrow, if you know what I mean. As in, this is a horrible thing that is happening right now, and we are seeing this happen before our eyes, and people are dying, and you have got nothing better to do than to jump up and down in the streets.
Right.
And at that moment, several things kind of showed themselves, and to me, that is what they're so much missing in the Middle East right now. If you ever want to bring peace to the Israelis and the Palestinians, what you need is an Arafat, because you need someone who can speak on their behalf. So you need somebody who can actually sign the document, and you know that they will stick to it. Whereas you've got the feeling, even if you would manage to agree peace these days, whoever the Palestinian leader would be, who would put his name to the document, some group within hours would just simply disown him and would say, "Oh, he wasn't speaking for us." Do you understand what I mean? Whereas Arafat was the one person you felt could have actually done it. And yes, he was then. He also seemed to die in somewhat suspicious circumstances. Which
happen
is more than likely not surprising, yes. But I would say that one moment was perhaps, if not one of his greatest, possibly his greatest moment, when he really turned up on television and he was appalled. And he was just basically telling them, "Get off the streets. How dare you?" And it really was something to behold.
So to round back round to the original point,
yeah,
Radlib,
There was a point.
Do you have a closing? Statement on Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk?
Well, real quick on the Dancing Israelis thing.
Sure.
My late friend Justin Raimondo at antiwar.com also thought this was extremely interesting at the time, and he wrote about it quite a bit. So that's interesting to read. In fact, I think the Israeli art student files, I think on antiwar.com shows all of his writing on this topic, and some other sources and stuff. But anyway, but then the other things that were covered by the Groypers that I didn't watch, there's a lot of questions asked and stuff. So immigration, the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Again, we discussed these things, the U.S.-Israel thing on the Cigar stream. I recommend it to you. And then this is the one where the Britisher is not going to be very sympathetic, but I'm going to plunge on anyway. As one Groyper put it quite bluntly, what does celebrating anal sex do for us in the culture war? Now, before the Britisher goes all anti-Puritan on us, let me be clear that what the frustration that's being expressed is that whatever latest fad it is, like the trans stuff, for example, the official conservative movement will be very quick to embrace it, And so they've got Lady MAGA, I think, sort of a takeoff on Lady Gaga, some trans thing, And Charlie Kirk from Turning Points USA is hanging out with Lady MAGA. And so the on the ground conservatives are like, in what sense do you represent us? You just seem to be jumping on whatever is the faddish train of the day. So that was one of the things they were trying to get at as well.
Mm.
Well, basically, somewhat surprisingly, not going to jump down your throat, as I think people always suspect. I fully understand that there are conservative forces, and that conservative forces are necessary in society.
That's all AA has been trying to get you to say. I'll play him this.
Unlike what most people think, I am actually on some subjects, conservative.
Yeah, you've indicated that. I picked up
just
on that.
I don't. I don't jump on the shame, let's stone the woman bandwagon, and that's where
crush all sin, and
because to my mind, when it comes to it, people are too keen to be either Aurelian, Diocletian, Constantine the Great when it comes to implementing their ideas, and
mm-hmm.
I would like to remind people of Domitian. So basically, you had Emperor Vespasian, who was the first of the kind, who was a sort of crafty, kindly old general who had seen it all, and is generally regarded very, very well by history, and is perhaps my favorite Roman emperor. His son Titus, who, Radlib will more than likely not see it that way, but he was actually quite beloved by the Romans. And then the second son, the third one in the line, who was Domitian. And he is basically reported to have been gotten rid of by the Romans because he was such a stickler. He was such a pedant. And the thing is, he didn't allow any leeway. And that's just it, that you must allow for the people whom you yourself view as having fallen or having sinned. There must be some way they can either redeem themselves, or in which they can kind of escape just being slaughtered by you, if you know what I mean. And he was too strict, to the point where the Romans kind of felt it was monstrous. And to my mind, yes, what the world needs is, of course, there are values and they're conservative values, but we need more Vespasian and less Domitian. And that's where
I was expecting you there, Bridget, to say what we need is more pornography. And that was where your entire point was going.
I'm reminded of that area of history that you don't talk about as much. That is everything between the Roman Empire and basically now. Martin Luther, I understand, and I wish I could find good documentation on this, but I understand that Martin Luther actually tried outlawing prostitution, and basically there was like a rebellion, and he had to back down. They weren't quite ready for that. So yeah, I think that there's spiritual and moral influence, right, which can be praised, and there's batting people over the head if they don't get quickly in line, which maybe is less constructive.
Yes, and as I say, I think there must be some understanding for those people who simply don't want to conform, but aren't aggressive, aren't militant,
right.
aren't, and you sort of feel, well, there must be room, there must not necessarily be room for Lady Marga, but there must be room for Oscar Wilde.
Right. Yeah.
The
Bohemians, the arty types, the ones who were they're not really trying to take over. They just kind of want to do their weird thing, and you just
they don't want to change the world. They don't want to change the world. They're not being militant. They're not campaigning, but they just don't want to be ground under heel by the system that doesn't want to give an inch. And that is what that is what I despise, but that is also kind of what I fear, because I see the pendulum. I see the pendulum swing, and what we have seen is we've seen the pendulum swing much, much too far towards the Lady Margas, and it's gone crazy. It's been ridiculous, but the swing is slowing. The resistance is growing to this.
You're feeling the counter-swing,
and that the counter-swing is going to come.
Yeah,
and I think this is where you sort of think, folks, everybody slow down. Let's be reasonable about this. As in, I fully understand. I don't want to see, people in rainbow-coloured thongs having it off with each other on floats through the city centre. I don't want to see, young 10-year-old boys being turned into trans drag queens and whatever. This is ridiculous. I don't want to see kids on hormone blockers abusive. And this nonsense.
The stuff with the children is abusive in my view.
But please, for heaven's sake, when I hear some of this moralized, see the pendulum, coming down and in a crash, just going past the center and off in the other direction. And you just go, well, in that case, we're just doing we're following from a rock into a hard place. This is not the way we want to go.
We're falling off the horse on the other side. One way I've heard it said. Yeah. I follow.
Right.
Yeah, I'm quite sympathetic to your point on this. And of course, to some degree, it's a judgment call about how far have things gone, and will it just swing back, or is it more of a ratchet effect, right? Where it swings towards this stuff and it doesn't really come back to where it was, or even close to where it was. There's a little bit of a reaction, and then it swings even further towards whatever you want to call that sort of stuff.
I am of sufficient age where I remember divorced women being a stigma. And people can sort of talk about, oh well, we've encouraged degeneracy and this and whatever, and of course they should be deterrent to society going this way or that way. And you just sort of say to yourself, do you really think that a woman who's divorced, perhaps through no fault of her own, should somehow be seen as some pariah in society? Do we really want to go back there? And I think in that regard, people have sort of a rose-tinted view of everything that was the past.
Well, that's always a tricky thing for people to for certain social norms, social practices are so far back now that most people don't know what it was really like at the time, and they sort of imagine what it's
so
like,
and
they
they've
can
got
imagine
this
it.
kind of
And
Walt
you
Disney
see,
version
to be fair, Britisher, you get both sides of it, both sides of imagining. Oh, back then everyone was just so terrible, and they were just kicking black people in the street, and you know what I mean, right?
Yes,
you have that sort of presentism,
and none of the
view.
Wilberforces ever existed really until the one savior was born. But we also forget about him from time to time.
And men,
Right.
just almost as a hobby beat their wives.
Exactly, right.
I mean, in fact, if you didn't get up and kick the crap out of your wife, or you didn't go down the road and beat your children into the factory, then of course, then women would come and place a white lily in your jacket to call you a pussy to all of society.
You would be seen as a bit of a girly man.
Yeah,
yes.
obviously,
Right.
Couldn't have that.
Yeah, so there's some reality in between. On the one hand, this presentism that looks at the barbaric past of 30 years ago or whatever, right?
Yes.
And then the nostalgic kind of thing of, oh boy, they really had it all sorted out back then, and if we were just back there, then everything would be great, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would, when it comes to sort of certain things that I would like to see return, and I know that it's wishful thinking on my, but if I would like to see a world, somewhat return, it would be, I would actually quite like to see a bit more toxic masculinity in the world. I remember the male of the species having a certain greater amount of grit to him back then. If I look at my father's generation, I see different men than in my generation, and I see definitely different men from the next generation after mine. And this isn't just me sort of, rounding on millennials. There was a certain attitudinal thing about it. And it's not represented in physical size and muscles and going to the gym and anything like that. If anything, there was much less than that back then than there is now. So now one might be trying to look like Vin Diesel, but somehow one doesn't quite have the same amount of grit. The smaller men of the past may perhaps have had a little more macho in them, a little more Robert Mitchum attitude without trying. And I really don't think this is rose-tinted glasses. I think that society has, in that extent, I wouldn't say feminized, but perhaps softened a little too much. So I know
that's interesting.
That will surprise people, because I think people just have a certain attitude of mind, being this sort of wishy-washy fence sitter and whatever, and embracing every single fancy liberal attitude that comes along. But yes, when I see sort of just even things like remembering advertising from the past. Do you remember, Radlib? Do you remember Camel Man?
Yeah, right. I know he'd be like crucified today if they tried to do something.
Yeah.
Like
So
that,
I mean,
right?
Are you trying to say that over time, despite having perhaps lost some of the more negative aspects, it's lost a nobility of sorts as well? In regards to the positive aspects of it,
Marlboro Man or Camel Man or whatever. The selling point was literally, here's just a really masculine guy. I mean, that was it. They just show him, and you're like, smoke what he's smoking.
He is a bloke. He is a bloke. Yes, and it kind of showed what sort of masculinity one was aspiring to, and it wasn't about what he may think about the trans community. No, it was, here is a guy on a raft in Indonesia with his land, and he's obviously, on some adventure, and he's completely exhausted, and he's taking 5 minutes, and he's smoking a Camel. and there was something about that view of masculinity, and of course it's a fantasy.
I know, but there's still an infuriating move towards androgyny across. Women are the new masculinity, and men are being forced towards femininity.
Being on the continent, of course, I got to see advertisements that never made it to Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Because, let's put it like this, on the continent one is much more likely, I don't know what it's like now, because obviously Me Too has happened over there also. But as I was growing up, you would see, you would have plenty of toplessness in adverts and whatever. There's absolutely no problem. And I remember once seeing a poster of a rather well-known back then Formula One racing driver.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, let's put it like this, he was embracing a rather fetching woman who obviously was a model, was topless at the time. But in order to make sure that it wouldn't be too rude, and her boobs would be full frontally visible, he was, let's put it, he was holding them for her.
I see. Yes.
And I know people would now say, oh well, this lascivious and whatever, but to me, it just kind of indicated that, yes, what women had the vote, this, that, and whatever, but there was a certain, dare one say, a certain grit, even a certain coarseness to a male attitude that didn't necessarily mean, women are just chattels or whatever, but it still, it still made no secret of the fact that men desired women. That is what made men male.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was not necessarily a great deal of shame. That was actually a much healthier society than what we've got now.
I lost you for a second there, Britisher, but I did get the main gist of it. I'll tell you what, we need to do another stream on, aside from the hardline Britisher positions, but also on what Britisher considers to be moral degeneracy, as we do not have too much time left, and I do want to get through the rest of the super chats, and I'm aware Radlib does need to go shortly. Do you want to ask the question you wanted to ask, Radlib, before the end?
No, I wanted to ask the Britisher a question.
Yes.
So there's something I've been puzzling over.
The answer is Julius Caesar. Sorry, what was your question?
I prefer to say Caesar myself, but anyway, Julius Caesar. So you talk about, when you're talking sort of about free speech issues and stuff like that, you talk about, hey, people aren't, well, I don't know exactly what you're saying. Something like people aren't, the most charitable reading, I guess, would be people are not controlled by what they see. They go to see a movie. Yes. And it shows something, and they don't immediately go out and just do it just because they saw it in a movie, right? You've said things like this many, many times.
Yes.
But sometimes it almost seems like you're taking such a strong stance on people not being influenced by what they see and read that it makes me wonder why you bother to make videos on YouTube. Do you follow my question?
I believe, yes, I follow your question. But I think there's a difference between trying to persuade, trying to make an argument, and seeing something happen. So, for example, I think if basically somebody is speaking to me, trying to lay out arguments, trying to persuade me a certain way, I have no doubt that if you listen to politicians speak to you, that is what they're trying to do. They are trying to persuade you.
Right.
I don't think watching The Highlander, it's my favorite film, I made no secret of it, and in The Highlander there are plenty of beheadings. I have to this day never felt any inclination, nor do I believe anybody who has watched that film has ever had any inclination to go and behead someone because they've seen that film. Do you understand? So to me, persuasion exists, but this idea that through seeing something you become it, that doesn't exist.
Okay, well, all right. So I would make this distinction then. In works of art, we talked about this in my creative writing classes because I did writing in college along with other things. There's a difference between, a plot element, right? Like Harry Potter has magic in it, but really the Harry Potter stories are not about magic per se, right? They're about, bravery and things like this, right? It's just that it's set in a world of magic. So I would not say that the persuasion that the Harry Potter books are trying to apply is to get you to be interested in magic, right? That would be to entirely miss the point, as I'm afraid some of my fundamentalist Christian brothers and sisters did miss the point. But they are trying to persuade you of something, right? The story, the work of fiction, the movie, in some cases is not strictly entertainment. It actually has like kind of a point it's trying to make, kind of something it's trying to nudge you towards and persuade you of. So even though it's a work of fiction, it can be trying to persuade you just as much as someone laying out an argument can be trying to persuade.
I see where you're going. Yes, I know what you mean. So that basically one tries to instill values, or one tries to
or destroy values.
I hear your argument. I'm not quite sure because I think largely when it comes to these things, more often than not, it's kind of providing an example. I'm not sure whether it's I understand that the motive for providing an example may be to inspire them to follow that example. But I'm not sure to what extent it is just entirely persuasion. It's one of those things that given that you've just kind of given the example to me, I would kind of need to think about it. But what I mean is that as I say, the ancient tales already of Perseus and Hercules and whatever are precisely that, like Harry Potter. So they're kind of examples in much the same way as more than likely to Christians the examples of the lives of saints are examples. But I'm not sure to what extent they are sort of active acts of persuasion,
Okay, sure.
in the same way that a politician's speech would be "vote for me." Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah,
but I know you would say they're more than likely a more slow burn, as in if that is applied over years and whatever, it may have an influence.
I think your language of examples is quite useful, but so here's where I think someone like AA could say, well, but we could recognize that in some cases bad examples are being presented, that if they were to draw people to them, would draw them to do things that would be destructive to their life, right? And that's not an argument to censor it or anything, but it might be. I don't think I would want my child to read that book or see that movie because they might be drawn to that example as sort of something to aspire to,
Yes, I mean that is the famous and sort of oft ridiculed famous line in Lady Chatterley's court case, isn't it? Where the prosecutor at some point said, to the jury, "Please remember, would you wish?" I'm paraphrasing here. Would you wish your daughter or your wife, or possibly one of your servants, to be reading a book like this? And it's generally, the reason it's so ridiculed is obviously because it kind of showed just what for a toff this guy was, that he was addressing the jury assuming that they would have servants.
Right. That's great.
So in a way, it's sort of one of those sort of oft used examples as to how out of touch the censorious class of that day was. But I understand what you mean, and to a certain extent, it is always up to parents to decide what their kids read.
And we have to be very careful to distinguish between parenting and making decisions for other adults, right? These are, in my view, nearly black and white difference. I mean, really, there's a huge gulf there. Right?
I mean, that would be, for example, where sort of one of my one of my views on muscular liberalism would kind of come in, whereby the choice of the parents has a role, insofar as I think that perhaps yes, one should be perhaps a little more pushy, a little more muscular when it comes to things that are taught in schools in Britain. And it should be it should be much more geared at turning out what I would call little Englishmen. And if certain minorities, for example, don't like that, then I would say that they have every right to, go elsewhere where that would not be done to their children. But they would have to understand that if we see there being a goal to our education system, it is to do that, and not to provide various alternatives whereby one could educate people, whether they were, in the same manner as though they were growing up in Karachi.
Right.
That is where
So basically, you're not a multiculturalist, is what you're saying.
I once was. But my view of multiculturalism changed significantly under the onslaught of terrorism. Because to my mind, with all the best wishes in the world, one then has to come to the conclusion that this hasn't worked.
Right. So maybe all cultures aren't beautiful, is where you grudgingly
I never thought that all cultures were beautiful. But I believed in the ability of, minorities to live peacefully side by side each other.
Ah, I see.
And it then became blatantly obvious that that wasn't the case. And that doesn't mean that I want to see everything regimented and, everybody must be a number, everybody must be turned out exactly the same. That is precisely the kind of society that I would hate. But I believe particularly in when it comes to schooling and childhood and whatever, in a certain approach of uniformity towards them, which then makes those who do not want to fall into that mold ask themselves whether they wish to be part of it or not. And then you can basically just point to the borders and say, look, this is a free country. We don't have an iron curtain. You are free to leave at any time of your liking.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, as an anarchist, I might not like the idea of it being the state borders, but the idea that, hey, look, nothing's making you stay in our community. This is how our community works, whatever size you think that community should be. This is how our community works. Like it, or you're free to go. We might even help you go. Bon voyage, have a good life, right?
No, it's
as opposed to the East German, you're going to live under our rules, and we're not going to let you. We're going to kill you if you try to leave.
It's basically people may well see that as a paradox, and I fully appreciate that there are certain paradoxical elements to it. Because as such, I tend to be very much someone who says, leave people alone. But, I think we also, to a certain extent, have to acknowledge that on certain levels, that there is an existential crisis going on. And with all the best will in the world and all the laissez-faire in the world, to a certain extent, societies need to have the right to defend themselves somehow.
Right.
And by basically saying, okay, this is Britain. In Britain, we expect people to be British, and we will, if you send people to a British school, we expect them to come out of that school British,
right?
And not aspiring to be something else.
Yeah,
especially not militantly so.
Perfectly good places in the world where you can be all these other things, right? And we're not trying to destroy them if you're not the United States.
The very place that either you came from, or one or two generations back, your forefathers came from, you are still perfectly at liberty to go back there if you think that is the way you would sooner live. We are not keeping you. But if you live here, then there might be rules to it, and that those rules might be, might be sort of societal rules that of certain expectations we have on you. And this is just it. When you listen to the AAs of this world, you will get the impression that, as far as I'm concerned, I'm perfectly at ease with, cats and dogs having it off with each other in the street.
Right.
It's ironic because that's exactly what my MP once told me. And when I later told someone about it, who incidentally voted that way, he sort of said, "How did you not hit him?" And I went, "Oh, it's because
your MP said to you what now?"
That if it were left to people like me, then folks would be having sex in the street.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I am very familiar with the oversimplification of AA and his attack hamsters. They're not as original as they think they are. In fact, a Labour MP, let me stress, a Labour MP said the very same thing.
Right.
So it basically AA communist confirmed. Because at the time I went to see him precisely to protest over a law that Mr. Blair, AA agrees, Blair confirmed. A law Mr. Blair was introducing that was regarding pornography, but which I ever since have always insisted was one of the worst things ever created, and was part of the thing that set a certain thing in a certain trend in train in Parliament. It's when you have these prohibitive things come in, it never ends there. It creates a certain
leeway.
It creates a certain precedent upon which one can then build. And you would be shocked to see what kind of precedents sometimes then get put forward as reasons for other law, as justifications for other laws to be introduced. As in, we can do this because this court, this appeal court upheld that particular case, and thus we are actually in Parliament justified in doing this. We have the right to do so.
Right.
And therefore,
the precedent is established, and off we go.
When they introduce things like that, it's sort of pedants like me who will go, "You do realize that you're basically overthrowing very, very important principles here." Oh, it doesn't matter. It's disgusting.
Yeah, right.
Precisely at the time, that was pretty much the argument that said MP was using. It's disgusting. How can you possibly be in favour of something that's so disgusting? I'm going, can we please just drop the word disgusting? It has nothing to do with this. It's a matter of what entitlement you have to interfere in someone's private life in this way, when in fact this is not public. It has nothing to do with the public. How can you apply public morality to what some people might choose to look on their computer screen over the internet? It doesn't,
I desperately need to get going.
Yeah, sorry.
To be continued then, definitely.
Yeah, maybe. I'll just say that this is what libertarians are used to getting, right? If we think that the state ought not to interfere in some area, then we're told that, the worst possible thing that people could do in that area must be the real reason why we don't want the state to interfere.
It's what we actively support. That's what they will do.
Right. What we're hoping is a world of, people doing coke while they're driving, and you know what I mean, or whatever, whatever crazy scenario you can think of. That's what we must be supporting.
Wait, you don't do that now?
They're not getting right. They're not getting the principled argument that we're making. So I'm certainly sympathetic with you there. Hey, just before I go, just wanted to say, Mark, my friend, I'm so glad that we finally worked this out. I think we'd been talking about me jumping on Fake Accents Unite for like months, and we finally did it. So I'm really pleased.
We have been talking about you for a while, yeah.
and I really enjoyed part. So thanks to
you. You have the fake accent.
Absolute pleasure,
right?
Or the lack of, the lack thereof.
Lack thereof.
So no, an absolute pleasure, mate. Really good to have you on. you planning on uploading any more frequently to your channel at the moment? Do you want us to link to that at all?
I want to, but we keep traveling and doing family things.
The joys of the anarchist lifestyle, I understand, is catching up with you. But
and more that I hope to read, but we'll see.
Well, we'll see. So, well, it's been a pleasure.
Okay.
All the best, mate.
Bye.
An honor and a privilege.
And take care.
Bye.
For the rest of us, I will have to run through the rest of the super chats still. Goodness me, we still need to go through some more of these. So Ratface has donated $5 and says, "We was Romans." Thank you for that, Ratface. The Mad Mercenary says, 20-year-old Britisher was the golden calf that the Israelites worshipped at the foot of Mount Sinai that took them away from God.
I made it, but I was the one who crafted it. I wasn't. Yes. That's frequently misreported.
The sculptor, rather than the bull. Mighty Bulls.
I could point out that I was also the burning bush up Mount Sinai, but
you mean you were having a smoke talking to the sky and accidentally sent one man off on a quest? Yes. Just having that moment of, instead of I think therefore I am therefore I am, and I am the I am.
Sum ergo sum.
Yes. Mighty Bolzac says, "Can we have an Emperor's Top Trump stream, not just Roman, Chinese, Persian, etc.? Ideas on that, Britisher? Is that something you'd be interested in doing?"
An Emperor's top stream. That's quite an interesting idea. I would need to sort of think. I would need to think on that as to where would one go with that, because it's such a broad thing. Then you would have to ask yourself what qualifies as an emperor.
Yes,
but that's definitely an interesting idea. That tickles me.
We may collate some information, some data together, and see what could be done, because it could be quite fun. And the Top Trump streams are just fun via format as well.
Yeah, and of course we could then also have sort of a top, and of course also worst.
Yes,
So therefore, of course, just for its joke potential, one would then have to follow. One would have to end on worst emperor, Sargon of Akkad.
Of course, yes, definitely. The Mad Mercenary says, "Leggings, Britisher. A Britisher's face on each cheek for perfect twerking."
Well, I mean, when it comes to merchandise, I don't think necessarily that might be the way I would go. Although I have a highly stylized version of a Britisher's face,
but
which one might actually be able to do that.
just imagine, Britisher. You know that scene which AA was giving you so much crap about the other week, where it's a room full of ladies attempting to learn to twerk in a gym.
Yes.
Imagine that, but a sea of British.
How could I forget?
A sea of Britisher faces on peaches across the room.
All wobbling gracefully. Yes.
Or not so gracefully in some other parts. JS says,
I'm just trying to remember what the name of that Danish fellow was who made a highly stylized version that one day I will definitely have on show, whatever. Because at one point I'll have to do some merchandise or something, because I think there's fun potential. Let's put it like that.
Definitely.
And with his, one might be able to do some intriguing stuff. With that one sort of caricature, if that fits the bill. I'll have to dig it out and show it to Not So Obvious, and I think he will get the meaning, what I'm trying to get at here.
Oh yes, definitely. JS says, "Big spike in dancing Israelis search stats this week." Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I've just found the name of the chap. He's called Scotch Bunny on Twitter.
Okay.
And he did a little commission once when I saw he had developed a very sort of interesting style of making sort of almost a little jokey avatars for people that were very sort of minimized in only sort of a handful of little strokes. And so I asked him, and he made me a Britisher. So I'll have to sort of dig that out once.
Oh yes, you'll have to show me that, definitely. So we have let me see if it'll load. There we go. British Knight donates £5. Thank you very much. And says, in the AA-type ideal world in which the dichotomy is between classical liberalism and paleo-conservatism, what would a centrist position actually be? Let me see. I mean, I don't. It's so hard to conceive of a world where one, that actually comes about, and two, it works.
Well, it's basically where Jacob Rees-Mogg, a world in which Jacob Rees-Mogg represents left. That's what Academic Agent actually wants, isn't it?
I'm just trying to think what the centrist policy, because the two positions that he's talking about here are not, I mean, too far distinct anyway. They just tend to disagree a little bit on, basically you're saying everyone almost all the way right wing on economics, and then differing levels of sort of mainly freedom.
And a state that's only responsible for policing, well, if that, and military.
Yeah. But ignoring the economic side of it, basically the positions he's talking about are between two levels of traditionalism, which are and the degrees to which the state enforces those.
Well, it would more than likely then simply differ in the severity of punishment.
Yeah, and I also think it would return to, if you remove what the left has become today and you look back 20 years at what conservatism was, and you look at various different groups, especially when it came to things like censorship, book burnings and whatnot, that was coming from the right. So it wouldn't surprise me if you saw kind of the rise of a dissident traditionalist group, who wanted to preserve traditions whilst preventing people from learning about them, learning too much about new stuff as it came along. It's just so hard. I don't know enough really conceptually about how those two positions really interact to talk about what a centrist position would be, which is a shame because I think it's a really interesting question, actually. But no, any other comments on that, Britisher?
No, I think I'm sort of equally lost as to where where exactly one could sort of nail it down, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, because it's not the anarchists, definitely, because they clearly don't exist between.
I mean, this is trying to draw a line between two camps
which
don't exist,
which are considered mildly soft towards certain issues and certain things because they're not. Yeah. Anyway, lastly, we have Architect of Fate who donates $5. Thank you much, and says, "NSO, it's time to put the Britisher leggings on the merch store. I want to protest outside Parliament with 30-year-old men twerking the Britisher's face. We'll make it happen, Architect of Fate. Don't you worry." So the last thing I want to talk to you about this evening, Britisher, is have you seen that gender-neutral emojis are now a thing?
Oh dear God!
But aside from
fresh hell is this?
Right,
gender-neutral emojis.
Right. So aside from the fact that most emojis are pretty androgynous anyway, and the only ones that they've really changed are like the bust style ones. So it's kind of like from shoulders to head upwards. So you've just got people with strange markings on their face and different coloured hair, which, to be honest, I couldn't give a jot about. But the funniest one that I've seen is in order to be more inclusive, of course, it includes a whole wave of disability ones, which includes a picture of someone with the walking cane that the blind use. The number of memes about how happy all the blind people will be when they see that they have access on this meme. Have access to this emoji.
What's the braille? What's the braille for emoji of person with a blind man's cane?
Yes, indeed. So that was amusing. But I did promise.
I'm trying to look at this article and understand what on earth you're talking about. I'm looking at The Guardian.
Looking at The Guardian?
Yeah. Apple introduces non-binary emojis with a set of inclusive faces. And I'm just looking at it and just go, I don't get it.
It's just basically more androgynous faces with more colours, and it means nothing. But
in what way do they look more androgynous than
the yellow ones that we had originally? Yes, I know.
I really don't get it. I must say this one completely goes over my head. Whatever the nuance is that I'm missing, I don't know what it is. I simply don't see it. As far as I'm concerned, these just look like emojis to me.
That's
like
fair.
any other emoji. So yeah, there must be something that I ought to pick up on that I just don't see. So yeah, sorry, can't comment because don't know what the point of this is.
Once you just refer to everyone on that emoji list as they Britisher, then you'll finally understand. But the Portrait Seal has donated £2 and says, Britisher, when is your helmet going up for sale?
That sounds strangely ambiguous.
Yeah, when is your helmet up for sale? Oh god, no, I didn't even click to that connotation, Britisher, you filthy-minded degenerate.
Well, yeah, there is that. Yeah, I've just seen Phil Mason has just tweeted out the statue of a sitting Constantine the Great outside York Minster. So you see, our words are truly reaching the quality on Twitter.
I just sorry, I was distracted by something there. Did you say anything important?
When do I ever say anything?
Oh, hardly. When is your helmet?
And it referred to the Romans. So let's draw a veil over it very quickly.
Well, we need to get a point where we can sell like cardboard cutouts of a pith helmet that you can print out at home.
Yeah.
Or not even sell, just have a printout that you could pop out origami style and wrap around your head to wear at Britisher time. That's what we need.
It's worrying. I won't go into any detail. But in the past, for some reasons, which I shan't go into, actually designed things that were kind of, three-dimensional and one could cut out and make into shapes.
Are you trying to say that countless times in your life you wore pith face?
Pith face?
Like some kind of Flashman-esque Justin Trudeau, yeah.
Who knows? Yeah, I mean, there was. It's interesting because, of course, pith helmets can also be made of cork. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Of course I am.
And when it came to the recent architectural awards, I don't know if you heard that it was trailed on the BBC quite heavily. That there was, I think, 6 different projects, of which whoever the body is that oversees architecture, they make a short list, and then from that short list, eventually, after a month or so, they choose the best architectural design of the year. And on the short list, it didn't win, but on the short list was a house made entirely of cork.
Amazing. You'd think if it got wet, you'd think it might wash away.
Yeah. No, they so obviously you could say they built pith helmets, but. What they, for those people who don't know, what they do is, you know how you can have sort of chopped up cork that is kind of glued together into a shape, if you know what I mean. So you get sort of grains of cork, really.
Yeah. And
you can kind of mold it into whatever shape you want.
Yeah.
So it's a byproduct, obviously, of the cork industry that mainly just corks bottles. So they realized that this material could be effectively molded into any shape. You just have this granular cork, you then make it into whatever shape you want. So they effectively designed blocks that interlock with each other. So you don't need mortar or whatever. They literally just pile onto each other, a bit like Lego bricks almost. And like that, you get the walls, and then they made similar design for roof tiles and whatever. So it's basically sort of slanting blocks that kind of are on top of each other. The whole thing is held together by gravity. And technically, if you wanted to move the house one day, you could just simply disassemble it and reassemble it somewhere else. And yeah, it had double glazing and the lot. But yeah, it was built from cork.
I hear someone took an idea about this and ended up creating something called, I don't know, Lego or something somewhere down the line.
Well, no, this was pretty much sort of reinventing how to build a house entirely from the bottom up. And they're kind of looking into, what other uses one might be able to, have for this. because obviously this was just a pilot project where they kind of looked what could be done, so to speak.
Yeah.
Apparently the insulation of the house was excellent. So yeah, I just found that was an interesting one. So somehow from pith helmets that can also be made out of cork, I got to Cork House. I apologise. Please, let's move on.
Thankfully, JS has sent a message in saying, "Have you seen the Ricky Gervais Jennifer Yaniv tweet? And have you British?
Is that the effectively Jennifer Yaniv Gervais face? Is that what I'm thinking of here?
No,
I saw a photo like that.
So Ricky Gervais said, "I was going to dress up as something weird and creepy for my Halloween party, but I'm bucking the trend this year, and I'm going as brave female activist Jessica Yaniv. This also means I don't have to wax my big old hairy balls."
Well, there you go.
And so on. So basically, 5 fans got uppity about this. So all the papers are like, oh, a comedian talking about trans issues, and they're in the wrong, and there's outrage in the tweets, and like that, all that stuff. Which obviously led Ricky to say, "Oh, my tweet upset some people yesterday, so I think I should apologise, delete it, and never make offensive jokes like this again." Which is obviously him being
a bit like
sarcastic.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, who also apologised today.
Which is also
for something he didn't say.
Well, he's not even apologising; he's just being sarcastic. Insofar as
Jacob Rees-Mogg is being sarcastic.
No. Ricky Gervais is being sarcastic.
Ricky Gervais, sorry, yeah. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, has apologised in all sincerity for something he didn't say. Which, make of that what you will. If you actually didn't say it, why are you apologising for it? But it's an election, so I guess we shouldn't expect too much.
I'm sorry,
people.
People misinterpreted a soundbite that was taken out of context. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, at one point I think he was in Downing Street or whatever, and he was getting into his minister jag, and an ITV journalist kind of, are you sorry for having insulted the dead of Grenfell and what? And he just kind of looked at him and said, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
And got in the car. And you thought, well, shouldn't that be your line? Should that not be what you stick with?
Yeah. I mean,
so once he then comes out and apologizes, you just think, well, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're apologizing for.
It wouldn't be beyond the realm of reason for him to, he's a wealthy man and he has time and people working for him, to just say, find a clip of me and then give it to me, so that whenever anyone asks me this question, I could just pull out a phone and play the clip and go, "It's not what I said. Thank you."
This is what I said, and just play the have it on an endless loop.
Like
you just press the button and it automatically plays it for the journalist.
Like flipping Shoe on Head when she had her gender wage gap button made. So that she could. The gender wage gap is not representative of this. It is really representative of the average earnings of men and women across time. Yeah. Anyway, so the I could remembering that one stuff. Portrait Seal donates £5. Says, "Built from cork, you say?" That's spelt CAULK in the super chat. The British are showing even more of his degeneracy. Smiley face. Clearly. Give it to me, NSO 2019. Apologies. Yeah, we've been going for a while this evening. 3 hours 11 minutes so far.
Well, I blame Rad Lib. We just couldn't shut him up.
Clearly, that was the thing, not the many.
Yeah, I mean, it's when he started off on the Romans. Who knows what you like. Sometimes he sounds a little like me, doesn't he?
I can't tell you apart. Clearly, I have to have an audio separator, just slightly pitching one of you up so I can tell.
Yeah, no. I think particularly when he started going off on on that tiz about the bust of Commodus. I mean, that's when he really left me. I was just bored rigid here.
I know, I'm very much enjoyable. And we've had some good stuff. I hope the chat enjoyed it as well. For those of you who are aware, 3 hours is not actually a record for us. I think one of the early ones went for 4. But I'll have to go back and check. Otherwise, it's definitely up with the longer ones. But unfortunately, it does mean it is time to bring it to a close, because I've got to be up in 7 hours, which is the joy. and I've still yet to eat. So unfortunately, I'm going to end it there. But do please like the stream, comment down below. What you thought of the guests, what you thought of Radlib, what you'd like us to talk about next time. That's because Fake Accents Unite is not just a weekly politics kind of stream. Want to know that sort of stuff. And let us know if you want us to do me to do a merch designing stream, if that's the sort of thing that you'd be interested in. And if so, please feel free to send stuff that you want us to make and sort out. And if you're an artist as well, then obviously more than happy to give you a cut of the profits if that's something that you want to do. Most of the merch at the moment sells for 0% profit though, so you'd have to let us know about that. But until next time, I will also shill that the Harry channel has done a video called Immorality, Degeneracy and the Britisher, or something along those lines.
He just hammers me into the ground, doesn't he?
Well,
once he's sort of hammered me into the ground like a rusty spike, he just keeps on hammering.
So, Tolerance, Immorality and the Britisher, sorry, that's that one. And it's very much a defence of the Britisher, much to his chagrin, as you can hear from him here. But thank you very much to everyone for joining me. Thank you very much to the Britisher for coming along for another week. We thought this would
another talk on Romans. We thought roundabout mention of politics.
We thought this would go on for maybe a month. Here we are, over nearly a year and a half later. So,
well, all I can say is I blame Radlib.
Absolutely, definitely. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.
Toodle pip.